Hello guys, welcome to the fiction series. Today we are gonna see, what if Naruto become Ban the Fox Sin of Greed and got Harem? Part 2. If you want more awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. So without wasting any time, let's get into the video. It has been a week since the group found Diane and fought against Gil Thunder. Currently, the group was on their way to Dalmari town, which was a couple miles outside of Base Dungeon, where the Fox's Sin of Greed was held. Right now, we see the women of the group taking a break outside with Diane talking to the Konoichi about other abilities and things they can do, with Meliodas inside the boar hat room resting by force due to a paralysis seal that was placed on him to keep him in bed. So you guys use this chakra to perform abilities and techniques such as breathing fireballs, walking on water, and creating those chains of yours? Diane asked with stars in her eyes, excited at hearing more about what the Konoichi can do. Kushina nodded and said yeah, but the chains are more mine and my daughter's abilities. Diane was confused. Why is that? How come only you two can do that? Naruto was the one who took over from here. You see, in the elemental nations, there are some people who have special abilities that only they or their clan can use. We call abilities like this Kekkei Genkai, or bloodline limit, and basically it makes it where only specific people and their families have a unique ability or skill. Our chains are a part of our clan's Kekkei Genkai, and so only me, my mom, and others from our clan can use them. Another example would be that some people from the elemental nations gain a mixed elemental chakra that allows them to use different elements other than water, wind, earth, fire, and lightning. One such element is the Bakutan, or the explosion release, which is a mix of earth and lightning chakra, allows the user to create explosions through different means, such as an explosive material that they create from their bodies that causes powerful explosions, or they can add an explosion to their attacks when using taijutsu or hand-to-hand combat for more damage. At hearing this, Diane got stars in her eyes again while imagining herself with explosions coming from her hands. Diane shook her head and then turned back and asked, "What else can you guys do?" Hannah decided to then take over from here. "Well, some other things we can do is form contracts summoning animals, like frogs, dogs, and hawks being some." "That doesn't sound too impressive, to be honest," Diane said while looking not very excited about that. Hannah and the rest just laughed at her reaction. "Well," began Hannah, "I can understand when you just hear that we can summon animals. But you see, the animals are different sizes and can be the size of our hands to being as big as you." At this, Diane's eyes went wide, before she then heard, sometimes also, depending on which species it is, they can also be bigger than you. Diane then began imagining a dog the same size as her, and then got the stars again. "Now that sounds cool," Diane exclaimed. The Konoichi laughed at how excited Diane was about hearing what they can do. Enko then began, "Along with that, we can also use gain jutsus or illusions. We can also enhance our strength and speed by channeling chakra to our limbs. And with seals, we can do almost anything." As Enko was describing each ability, Diane was thinking about each one. When she heard about how they can cast illusions, she wasn't really sure how to feel about that one. When she heard about being able to enhance their strength, Diane thought that was pretty cool, since that would mean they could be stronger depending on how much they channel. However, the last part is what really interested her. "Wait, you can do anything with these seals of yours?" Diane asked, with a question in mind. Enko seemed to think about that. "Well, almost anything. There are some things that we can't do with seals, like living forever and such. But yeah, most things should be possible." Diane then looked nervous before she asked, "Could seals help make me smaller?" The Konoichi were surprised at this request before they all looked at Kushina, who was deep in thought, mumbling some stuff that was missed, before she looked at Diane, who had a look of nervousness and slight hope, and asked, "Before I answer that, I need to know." Diane nodded her head, ready to answer the questions. "Why do you want to be smaller?" Diane then sighed while having a look of sadness. "It's because in the past, I always wanted to be able to experience some of the things that humans experience without scaring everyone off. I want to be able to walk among you guys without the fear of stepping on one of you." Diane began to get tears in her eyes, also to be able to show him how much I like him. This last part she muttered, hoping no one would hear. However, unknown to Diane, Kushina and Hannah heard what she said, and both smiled at such a poor reason. "Well, in that case, how could I possibly say no?" Kushina said with a smile, getting Diane to brighten up with tears still in her eyes. "Thank you? Thank you? Thank you?" Diane began saying over and over, incredibly happy at being able to be smaller. The Konoichi all smiled at how happy Diane looked at hearing that she could be smaller. Now I will begin working on it right away, so that you can have it as soon as possible. Also, do you want it, where you can change your size at will? Kushina asked, with her answer being Diane nodding her head up and down rapidly like a little kid. Yes. That would be so useful. Diane exclaimed. Alright, well, I'd better get to work, and we had better keep on moving if we want to make it to Dalmari town by morning. Kushina said. Right. Said the others who were present. And with that they were back on their way to Dalmari town. Couple hours later, it was another couple hours before the group finally reached Dalmari town. Once they got there, the first thing they did was look for a doctor to check and make sure Meliodas' wound was fine. We now find Kurenai, Anko, Hana, Naruto, Kushina, Elizabeth and Hawk standing around in a doctor's office, with Diane outside by the window, as the doctor checked Meliodas' shoulder. Well, I can tell you for sure that you did an excellent job of wrapping and disinfecting the wound, informed the doctor. Hana felt pride in herself at this bit. Now, it looks to be healing well. I would say another day or two of rest and some medicine and it will be all healed. Wait here while I go get the medicine, informed the doctor, before he got up and left. The group sighed in relief that nothing has gone wrong just yet. However, while everyone was waiting for the doctor to come back, none of them noticed an insect that seemed to stare at Diane from a rooftop. In a dark room. I've found them. They're at the doctor's building, said a feminine voice. Are you going, Frisia? Asked another voice to the now named Frisia. Frisia was a woman who wore dark red armor, with fur around the bottom half of her legs. Her helmet looked like an eight-eyed, eight-legged spider, and in her hands was a green, dual-tailed whip. The now named Frisia got up from where she was sitting. Yeah, I'll be going to deliver the first strike and end him along with that little group of his, she exclaimed while beginning to swing and twirl her whip. However, in her head, she was thinking, I hate this. I hate how the Holy Knights have changed from how they were before. Why did I join these jackasses anyways? Kurenai cleared her throat, gaining everyone's attention. Alright, well, now that we know he will be alright, we should make a plan. The group nodded and began to listen. Now, Diane, you will head to base dungeon to begin checking it out. Right. You can count on me, Diane exclaimed. Kurenai nodded then said, while you do that, we'll go get the others then follow soon after. Is this good with everyone? Everyone nodded yes, and with that Kurenai, Hana, Naruto, and Kushina went to the boar hat to get the others. This left Anko, Diane, Elizabeth, and Hawk alone while the doctor got the medicine. Well, began Diane while getting up, I'd better start heading to base dungeon. And with that, Diane began to make her way in the direction of base dungeon, but before she could get too far, Elizabeth came running out, with Hawk and Anko following her. Wait! Exclaimed Elizabeth, gaining Diane's attention. HM? What's up? Asked Diane, curious on why Elizabeth stopped her. I wanted to know why you seemed so excited about meeting Sir Ban, asked Elizabeth. Diane began to blush before stuttering. What? No. Why would you think that? Because, as we came closer to base dungeon, you grew happier and more excited every day, Elizabeth explained, getting Diane to blush even more. Before she continued, I figured you were simply happy about being in a town and Meliodas getting checked, but you always seemed happiest whenever we would talk about Sir Ban. So, I wanted to know why you were excited about seeing Sir Ban again? Elizabeth concluded, with Diane beginning to look like a real, giant tomato. Diane then sighed and put her head down, while still blushing before she looked back at Elizabeth and began, well, you see, I guess it started way back when I first met Ban. Flashback, many years ago. Diane was currently standing with her hands on her hips, looking quite annoyed. Why, you may ask? Well, it may have something to do with the 4 knights that are currently in front of her. Get out of here! Yelled one of the knights. No one wants your kind here! Yelled another knight. Diane then crossed her arms. Humph! Why should I listen to you? It's not like you can do anything to force me, Diane said, while still looking annoyed. Besides, isn't it rude to try and force a beautiful girl to do something she doesn't want? What beautiful girl? You're just a giant. You're not beautiful, the knights yelled. Go back to your homeland. They yelled at her. Nobody could ever love monsters like you. They yelled again. I can't believe how arrogant you humans are. And all because there are so many of you, Diane said with a condescending look. Why you? We'll show you and force you to leave. Get her! Yelled one of the knights. Right! Yelled the others, and with that they began to charge at her. However, before they could make it halfway to her, the knights and Diane all heard a loud WOH. Before they then heard a crash, followed by a loud OMPH sound. This made them all stop and turn to the sound, where they all saw a man, who seemed to have fallen from a tree, and was currently on the ground, rubbing his head, before he stood up and yawned, showing his slightly enlarged canines. He had short, silverish blue hair with red eyes that seemed to have a tinge of violet to them. He was wearing dark brown shoes, black, baggy pants with a black open vest with royal blue lining that showed his muscular physique. On top of it all, he was wearing a long, black trench coat that seemed to fall down to his shins, and lying next to him on the floor was a dark purple, drawstring bag, with a light red bottom that was currently open, showing that inside were some clothes, wanted posters, some bottles of alcohol, a couple of spearhead-shaped throwing knives, and a steel, 3-section staff. Diane and the knights watched as he then reached down, grabbed his bag, and put it over his shoulder, before he then looked at the 5 of them with a curious look, before he asked, "What's going on here? Move along! This has nothing to do with you!" Yelled the knights. "Just move along, human! I don't need your help!" Yelled Diane, thinking that this human is going to treat her badly as well, but she was surprised, when, now why should leave a beautiful girl to fend for herself? He asked with a raised eyebrow. This surprised Diane as she had not expected him to compliment her like that, and began to blush lightly. She was even more surprised when he began moving to stand between her and the knights. He stood there, with his bag over his right shoulder, his left hand in his pants pocket, slouched and a lazy look in his eyes. "Hey assholes," he addressed the knights, which made the knights furious at how disrespectful he was being, and Diane giggled a bit, which the man caught and smiled lightly. "Why don't you guys just leave her alone? After all, it's not like she did anything to you. Why you? How dare you take the side of a monster? You bring shame to humans!" Yelled one of the knights. The man simply raised an eyebrow, while pointing a finger at himself with his left hand. "I bring shame to humans? I think you must have me confused for yourself, because only the worst kind of scum gang up on a beautiful girl," he said, making the other 5 present red in the face, for different reasons. The knights were red because they were furious at how disrespectful this man was being. Diane, however, was red because he called her beautiful again. "You traitor!" Yelled the knights. "We'll show you what happens when you side with monsters. Guys, let's get him!" Yelled a knight. "Yeah!" And with that, the 4 knights began to charge again, this time aiming for the disrespectful man standing in their way. The knights and Diane all saw that he hadn't moved or changed his stance at all, and expected the man was going to be killed easy. What they didn't expect was that right when their swords were about to hit him, he disappeared from their sight. "You do know, you're not going to be able to do much with those sticks in your hands, right?" asked a voice from the side. The knights and Diane turned and saw him leaning on the tree he had previously fallen out of, with all 4 knights' swords. 3 were leaning against the tree with him, while he examined the 4th in his hands. The knights and Diane were all surprised to see this. The knights were confused on why those swords looked familiar, before looking at their hands and saw that they were holding a bunch of sticks. That was when they realized he had stolen and replaced their swords with sticks in the blink of an eye. Diane was impressed that a human could move so fast. "Now," he began, gaining everyone's attention on him again, "do you still want to try and fight, or are you going to leave now?" the man asked, while now glaring at the knights with a dark aura around him, causing the knights to get scared and begin running away. Diane watched the knights run away before turning to the man, as he relaxed while giving a sigh of relief, before he sat down and continued examining the swords before asking himself, "I wonder how much these would sell for?" "Hey!" Diane began, gaining the man's attention. "I didn't need some puny human standing up for me. I could have taken care of myself," Diane exclaimed, feeling like the human thought she was a pushover. The man simply looked at her before going back to examining the swords and replying, "I know that, but that's not why I decided to stand up for you." Diane grew confused. "Then why did you decide to stand up for me?" she asked while crossing her arms underneath her bust, making them look bigger than they already are. "Because it was the right thing to do," replied the man while still looking at the swords, getting a surprised look from Diane, before he then added, "Besides, I just didn't like how those guys were ganging up on a beautiful girl such as yourself." Diane began blushing again, before shaking her head and glaring at him, which didn't look very menacing considering she still had a blush, why are you lying? She asked, getting the man to stop examining the swords before giving her a confused look. What do you mean? Asked the man while tilting his head. Come on, I know you can't possibly think I'm beautiful. You probably just said that to get on the knight's nerves, when in reality, you really think I'm a monster. Explained Diane, thinking she had him. However, she was surprised when the man began chuckling before flat out laughing. Why are you laughing? Diane roared, wondering why he was laughing. The man continued to chuckle for a bit, before he looked at her with a wide, happy smirk. I'm laughing because you actually believe I would think you're a monster. This surprised Diane before the man said, Why would I think a beautiful girl, such as yourself, is a monster? Diane began blushing up a storm, before she put her head down and began saying in a low voice, Because I'm different from you. And what's wrong with that? Diane raised her head in surprise, getting her to look at the man, who was currently wearing a soft smile, while still having a lazy look in his eyes. There's nothing wrong with being different. I have some friends who are different from those around them. All that matters is that you find people who accept you for who you are. Diane was surprised by this man, who instead of thinking and calling her a monster, instead called her beautiful and meant it. She began to blush again before she then cleared her throat and asked, Well, can we maybe be friends? The man nodded and said, Sure, we can be friends. Before he then began chuckling again. This got Diane to blush a little more before she asked, What? What are you laughing about? The man stopped chuckling and looked at her before saying, I'm laughing at how we became friends and yet we still don't know each other's names. The man began saying before he began laughing again at the end. Diane looked surprised before she joined in the laughing. I guess you're right. So, let's introduce ourselves. Diane then kneeled down and held out her hand before saying, My name is Diane, and I'm from the Giant Clan. The man looked at her hand for a second before he got up and moved towards her, and gripped her hand as best he could, with her doing the same, being careful not to crush his hand. Nice to meet you, Diane. My name is Ban Fox, of the human race. Flashback and Diane had a beautiful, soft smile on her face before she continued, From then on, we had been almost inseparable. We just moved where the wind took us, enjoying life, hanging out with villages that welcomed me in. And the villages that didn't, we would camp outside of the village, and then leave in the morning. Diane then began laughing, but every time we began to leave those villages, he would have me wait for a second before he ran back to the village for about 20 minutes every time, before he came running back with this huge, proud smile on his face, with the entire village chasing him. Diane started to laugh even harder when she remembered the villagers. All of them were either covered in paint, feathers, or had bad makeup and weird hairdos. Like orange afros, green spikes, or, my favorite, pink mohawks. This got Elizabeth and Hawk to start laughing, but Enko looked deep and thought, Those pranks sound familiar, like I've seen them before. Thought Enko, but the one I remember doing them at the village, when... Enko's thoughts began to trail off when she remembered the only person who ever did pranks like that in the village. Enko's eyes then went wide at that thought. No! Is it possible? Enko then began to think carefully on her assumption. But that doesn't make sense. Diane is describing her encounter from many years ago, but he was banished only 4 years ago. So how would that work? As Enko was thinking, Diane, Elizabeth, and Hawk just got done laughing, but she was brought out from her thoughts when Diane continued to talk. We had a lot of fun and we actually joined the 7 deadly sins together. But when we were framed for the great holy knight's death, we all separated, and I haven't seen him since. Diane frowned when she said this, before she then got a soft smile. So if I seem excited, the reason is because this will be the first time in 10 years that I have seen my best friend again. Elizabeth, Enko, and Hawk all smiled at Diane, happy that she will be able to see her friend again for the first time in a long time. Well, began Elizabeth, good luck Lady Diane, and stay safe. Diane smiled and nodded before she got up to begin heading to base dungeon. But before she could begin moving, all 4 of them noticed that the sky near base dungeon was getting dark and was moving towards the town. Are they thunderclouds? Hawk asked. Is it Gil Thunder again? No, Enko said, it sounds like wings. Elizabeth then said, this can't. Bugs? Hawk then exclaimed, not just any bugs. It's a massive swarm of poisonous bugs. The 3 women were shocked at this exclamation before they then watched as the swarm got closer. Then, when the bugs were right above the town, they all began spitting poisonous acid on the town, melting everything that was hit. This surprised the group, as they watched the town being melted slowly. This must be an attack from a holy knight, exclaimed Hawk Diane. We're counting on you to help, however, Kaya. I hate bugs. Diane has a severe dislike for bugs. Elizabeth then noticed that the bugs were attacking the doctor's building too. So she began running to the doctor's building to try and warn Meliodas. Enko noticed she was running back and gave chase while forming some hand signs before she ended on Tiger and mentally shouted, Katan, Gokaku no Jutsu. With that, let Enko lose a giant fireball into the sky, burning a good chunk of the insects. This caught Elizabeth's, Hawk's, and Diane's attention, and they were all amazed by this with Diane having stars in her eyes, again. But then Diane shook her head, and got serious. I can't let you show me up like that, Diane said before she then slammed her hand on the ground. Besides, we're stronger than the holy knights. She then raised her hand and from the ground came several pillars of earth that destroyed the rest of the bugs. So, letting a few bugs stop me would make me look bad. The trio were amazed to see how easily Diane destroyed the rest of the bugs. Before they began to check on everyone in the town, however, while the four were outside making sure everyone was safe and sound, Dr. Dana had come back with the medicine. Here you go. This will help give you some comfort for the pain, and it will make you feel sleepy, so make sure to go right to sleep right after. You still need rest after all, said Dr. Dana. Meliodas took the bowl and said with a smile, Thank you very much for helping us. And with that Meliodas drank the medicine, before laying down on the bed, going right to sleep. Dr. Dana then began to cry and sobbed, Please, please forgive me. I don't have a choice. Meanwhile, in base dungeon, the two guards, who were currently standing outside of Ban's cell, began talking. Hey, wanna bet on who will win? Asked one of the guards. HM? What do you mean? Asked the other. The Weird Fangs and the 7 Deadly Sins, they're fighting right now, said the first guard. This got the attention of a certain prisoner with silver blue hair, as he continued to listen in on the conversation. That's not much of a fight. I heard that they currently only have their captain and one other member, replied the second guard. This now really got the attention of the prisoner inside the cell, and just as he was about to kick down the door, he heard something even more interesting. True, but I also heard there is a group of women traveling with them, and one of them actually breathed fire just by making some weird hand gestures, the first guard said. This got the prisoner's eyes to widen before he finally decided to make his presence known. Well, that sounds really cool, came a voice from inside the cell. This surprised the guards, who were immediately on alert. When they heard the voice continue speaking, sounds like it ought to be fun, especially with that group of women who can breathe fire with just a few hand gestures. As soon as the voice was done talking, there was a loud bang, at the same time as a footprint was indented into the steel door. It then began to fall down, until it hit the floor with another resounding bang. The guards were terrified as they saw a silhouette of a man begin walking out of the cell. Out of the cell came a man with long, messy, silverish blue hair that reached his upper back with thick facial hair to match and red eyes that had a touch of violet. He had unbuttoned, purple pants with metal studs, and holes that revealed where the metal spikes had previously been. He still had 2 more spikes in his body, with one in his left shin, and the other in his right forearm. But the thing that really drew attention was the red fox symbol on the left side of his abdominals. Ah! The man groaned, while cracking his neck. It feels so good to walk around every now and then. No way! The 7 Deadly Sins, Ban. The fox sin! Exclaimed the first guard. The second guard then exclaimed, Damn you! How did you get out of there, and why now? The now named Ban said, Isn't it obvious? He then reached down for the spike in his shin and pulled it out with a little effort that was heard in his voice when he said, I kicked the door down. He then tossed the spike on the ground, before reaching for the spike in his arm and began to pull on it while saying, And as for why, it's because you were talking about some totally interesting stuff. Ben then pulled the spike out, and caused some blood to splash on his face, while saying, You said he was alive? Our captain? He then looked at the 2 guards with a serious look and narrowed eyes. And what was that about women breathing fire? The 2 guards were terrified as they watched him toss the last spike to the ground. However, before they could answer, a voice came from a couple feet away and was getting closer. What's all this commotion? The owner of the voice was young knight with silverish lavender hair that was held in a ponytail with some hair swept over the left side of their face and amber eyes. They wore a dark purple coat over regular, steel, full body armor, with a sword at their side that has a U-shaped pommel, and the guard is made of 2 straight pieces with curves at the end, with one facing the sword and the other facing the pommel. Jericho! Exclaimed one of the guards in relief. The now named Jericho then began said, Ban of the 7 deadly sins. I don't know you escaped, but return there at once. While pointing their thumb in the direction of Ban's cell at the last part. How about some respect, little girl? Ban began, before continuing while stroking his beard. I'm not sure how you were raised, but is that any way to talk to a hero? Jericho just replied by saying, I am an apprentice holy knight. You dare call me little girl? That's pretty disrespectful for a prisoner on death's door. Jericho then turned to the guards and ordered, Go to Sir Galgius and the others at once. Tell them all, Jericho had to defeat the fox sin when he escaped and tried to resist. Right. Came the reply from the guards before they began leaving. After about a minute, it was now just Ban and Jericho, and they stood in silence for a moment, before Jericho began to reach for her sword. Then she began running at him before she began to swing her sword at a fast pace. To a normal person, it would look like there were multiple Jerichos attacking Ban. Ah! Screamed Ban, while Jericho then appeared behind Ban, before flicking and sheathing her sword while not facing Ban, believing she had just defeated him. But then instead of hearing the sound of a bleeding body falling to the ground, But ho ho ho. Do you think I had you take off too much? Asked Ban, as he turned around, rubbing his chin while also showing his new haircut with a satisfied smirk on his face. Jericho turned around in shock, with wide eyes as she watched Ban rub his chin. Well, it feels pretty good, so I guess I'm okay with it. You got some real talent with that sword there, little lady. Keep practicing and you might be able to beat me one day, Ban said while complimenting her, causing her to blush lightly from the compliment. Jericho then shook her head and asked, How did you dodge my sword with all those injuries? Sounding slightly shaken up, Ben looked kinda surprised before he replied, Injuries? What are you talking about? Huh? Before he began waving his arms up and down, along with his legs, while examining himself, showing that his body had no injuries on it. Jericho then looked really shaken up before saying, That's impossible. Your limbs were full of holes from steel spikes running through them. It'd be good if you remember this, little lady. Began Ban, gaining Jericho's attention. There's only one wound on me, and it's this one right here, got it? He continued, while now pointing at the scar that was on his neck and led up to his cheek. Jericho was surprised by this, but she didn't have a chance to reply, as Ben then said, So you could say that injuries I get from that guy are kinda a special case, I guess. Jericho was surprised by this information, but before she could come up with something to say, Ben then added one more thing. Now, Ben began with his head slightly down to shadow his eyes, before he then raised it and looked at Jericho with the same look that he gave the guards from before, and said, Maybe you can tell me about these women who breathe fire? The look he had on put Jericho slightly on edge, and yet, at the same time, it slightly turned her on from seeing how powerful and handsome he looked. Sometimes she really hated how much her teacher rubbed off on her. Meanwhile, back at Dr. Dana's office, Enko, Elizabeth, and Hawk were back inside Dr. Dana's office, where they found Meliodas on the bed sleeping. Elizabeth was sitting next to the bed watching Meliodas to make sure he was all right. Hawk was resting on a stool nearby, and Enko was leaning against the wall, next to the door. As they were watching Meliodas, Dr. Dana came into the room and asked, How is the patient doing? Elizabeth answered, He been doing well. That medicine you gave him seems to have put him to sleep. Hawk agreed and said, Yeah, he looks dead or something. Elizabeth got scared by this before she turned to Hawk and exclaimed, Hawk, don't say that. Enko then finally decided to ask something that had been on her mind since the three of them came into the room with Meliodas. Hey Dr. Dana, I know you're a man of medicine and all, but something has been bothering me about that medicine, she asked while pointing to the bowl that had held the medicine before Meliodas drank it. Dr. Dana turned to Enko and asked, Yes, what is it? Enko then moved to the doctor and had an angry look on her face before she picked up the doctor by his collar, surprising Hawk and Elizabeth. If it was supposed to be medicine, Enko began, getting Dr. Dana to begin to lightly sweat at what he figured she was about to ask. Then why does it smell so much like poison? Elizabeth and Hawk were now really surprised at what Enko was accusing the doctor of. But before they could say anything, Dr. Dana said, Because it is. That caused Elizabeth and Hawk to go wide-eyed, with Enko getting angrier. But the doctor continued, Wolfsbane, belladonna, tiger beetle, henbane leaf, make a deadly poison when mixed. Once taken, you begin to feel sleepy, before you decide to go to sleep, where you then never wake your eyes again. No pain, no suffering. Enko was now livid at what the person who was supposed to help decided to go against their oath and instead kill one of the people who they were supposed to help that could have helped them stop the Holy Knights. Elizabeth was distraught at finding out that Meliodas was dead, as was Hawk. However, before any of them could say anything, they all heard a voice. Do please forgive the good doctor, he was after all only doing what he was told, in exchange for his daughter. Enko dropped Dana and moved to Elizabeth and Hawk, before pulling out two kunai that she held in a reverse grip in both hands. Then, out of nowhere, a knight appeared in the room, standing between the group and Dr. Dana. He wore full body armor, with his torso covered in a metal breastplate, while his arms were covered in metal chainmail. The upper part of his legs were covered in armor as well, but the rest were clad in knee-length metal boots. His helmet, however, was what really brought attention. It looked like a demon with slanted eyes. 9 dots were over each eye, a mouth of sharp teeth, and horns on the side. Behind him looked to be a sword with the blade appearing to be a foot in width and a foot and a half in length. The group were surprised at this holy knight just appearing out of nowhere, who had his right arm placed in front of him as if he were going to bow, and said, "Allow me to introduce myself. I am Holy Knight Galgius of the Weird Fangs." He then bowed slightly and put his right arm forward towards Elizabeth. "Princess Elizabeth, I have come to pick you up." Hawk then got in front of Elizabeth and exclaimed, "Not so fast. I, Sir Hawk, Knight of Scrap's Disposal, shall be your opponent." However, Sir Galgius didn't bother with Hawk and simply said, "And this sword?" he exclaimed while lifting the blanket from Meliodas's body. To show Meliodas still held onto the sword, Galgius then turned to Meliodas and said, "7 sins Meliodas, this is worthless while in your hands, so we will be taking it back." Sir Galgius then began to reach for the sword, but when grabbed the sword and held it up to examine it, he noticed Meliodas was still holding onto it, standing with shadowed eyes. Everyone was shocked to see that Meliodas was standing, even though they had been informed that he had taken a powerful poison. While they were all trying to figure out how this happened, Meliodas was remembering a night from the past. Flashback, many years ago. It was the middle of the night. Diane and Ban and Meliodas were all camping out in a canyon. Lying next to them were the dead bodies of some monsters that they had killed. Currently, Diane was sleeping on the ground off to the side, and Ban and Meliodas were sitting by the fire. They had just finished eating when Ban decided to say something that had been on his mind for a while. "Hey, Captain." Meliodas was drinking some alcohol and said, "Yeah, what is it? How come you always have that sword with you?" Ban asked, "I mean, I've never seen you without it. What's so special about it anyways?" "It's not that special," replied Meliodas. "So can I see it?" Ban asked. "Sorry, Ban, but you can't," replied Meliodas. Ban moved over to behind Meliodas and grabbed the hilt of the sword. "Come on, just let me have a little peek." Ban was then surprised when Meliodas grabbed the hilt as well, and said, "Let go, Ban." It was at this time that Diane began to wake up, and while rubbing her eyes, she said, "Hey, you two, you're still up? Just step away, Ban. You don't want to make me angry," Meliodas said. Ben blinked his eyes before he asked, "Make you angry? Are you serious? You and me have been hanging together for a lot of years now. And in all that time, I've never seen you get mad once." "I mean it," said Meliodas, with his eyes now covered by his hair. Diane is still off on the side, watching with a worried expression when she heard Ban say how he was wondering how Meliodas got called the Dragon's Sin of Wrath. She decided to find out what was going on and asked Ban, "What do you think you're doing?" Ben then began to really try and take the sword by pulling with both hands, and while doing this, he was saying, "If doing this means I get to see you angry, then I want to see it even more." Ben then got a greedy glint in his eyes and said, "No, I want to steal it." It was then that Meliodas swung the sword and sliced Ban along the left side of his neck and on part of his cheek from his chin. Diane then exclaimed, "Ban!" worried for her best friend, who just got sliced. Ben then jumped back and landed on his feet, while chuckling before he said, "Well, looks like I just saw a hidden side of you. Cool." While rubbing some of the blood away from the wound, Meliodas then began to say, "Sorry about that, Ban. But this sword is..." Flashback, and suddenly an immense amount of pressure began to fill the room, before Meliodas said, "I can never let go of this sword, even if I die. This is the only thing I can do to atone for my sin." Meliodas then looked at Galgius, and showed that he had black eyes, as well as a black spiral mark above his right eye. Galgius began to shake in fear. However, before he could escape, he was captured by several purple chains that had energy coming off of them. This snapped Meliodas out of it as everyone looked to see that it was Kushina with chains coming out of her back, holding Galgius in place, with an angry look on her face as well, with the rest of the Kunoichi standing all around the room. I don't like it when someone sneaks up on me. However, I hate it when someone sneaks up on people I care about, Kushina said before she then slowly began tightening the chains around Galgius. Everyone could hear the sound of creaking metal, meaning that Kushina was slowing crushing Galgius. Galgius was shouting in pain, "Please spare me." "Hold on, Kushina-sensei," spoke Anko, gaining everyone's attention. "We can't kill him, because he said they are holding the doctor's daughter hostage. So, how about you give him to me so I can find out where exactly?" All the Kunoichi agreed, and Elizabeth, Meliodas, and Hawk could see a certain glint in Anko's eyes that made them shiver. However, Galgius decided to be really stupid and exclaimed, "Ha! You'll never get anything out of me, you stupid bitch." At this, the room went silent before everyone felt and saw a dark aura around Anko as she stood with shadowed eyes, before she looked at Galgius, and they all saw in her eyes said the word dark before Anko then said, "Well, I guess you really need to be taught a lesson." Anko then grabbed Galgius by one of the horns on his helmet, before saying, "Come along now, it's time that Mistress Anko gives you a lesson." With that, they all watched Anko disappear into another room with Galgius, before they began to hear cries of pain and shouts begging for mercy. This continued for 5 minutes, where Anko then walked out looking very pleased with herself, before she then told everyone, "Well, it as turns out, the doctor's daughter was also being held at base dungeon. So, this actually works for us, because as we look for Ban, we can also look for the man's daughter while we're at it. This kills 2 birds with 1 stone." The group agreed with this, but then Meliodas decided to add, "Actually, we'll only need to focus on finding Sinet." Everyone was confused by this, and Satsuki asked, "Why? I thought we were also supposed to get banned from base dungeon as well?" Everyone was nodding at this, before Meliodas elaborated, "Well, you see, we only need to focus on finding the doctor's daughter, because if I know Ban, he'll have heard that we're here and will have busted himself out already, and is simply waiting for us." Everyone now had a look of understanding at what Meliodas was saying, and decided to trust his word. And with that, all the Kunoichi, Elizabeth, Meliodas, and Hawk, all began to make their way out of the town, towards base dungeon. As they were walking, Elizabeth suddenly remembered something. "Oh!" she exclaimed, getting everyone's attention, before she pulled out Meliodas's bag and sheath for his sword. "While you were sleeping, I fixed your things for you. It might not be very good, but..." "Oh, thanks, Elizabeth," said Meliodas as he put his stuff back on. And with that, the group continued towards base dungeon. However, as they were on their way, Diane suddenly appeared in front of them, which startled Elizabeth, Hawk, and Hinata at her sudden appearance. "Diane?" asked Meliodas, "What are you doing here?" Diane was staring at them with blank eyes. "Captain?" She wondered for a second, before her eyes widened and she started exclaiming, "Captain! You're supposed to be resting. What are you doing here?" "He's fine, but the important question is, what are you doing here?" Kushina asked, curious on why Diane was here. "What do you mean, what am I doing here?" asked Diane, genuinely curious. Anko then stepped and said, "Well, after you helped me finish the rest of the bugs attacking the town, you began to follow the plan and were headed to base dungeon so that you could check it out, while you wait for us to meet you there." Diane was silent before she tilted her head and asked, "I did?" At this, the group began to suspect that something was off, that was at least, until they all suddenly heard a bell ring, and then Diane began to shout, "A holy night!" While looking right at Meliodas, they watched Diane looked around asking where Meliodas was, until she suddenly attacked Meliodas while shouting, "Give them back!" Diane's attack launched Meliodas a good several meters back, before he crashed and stopped moving. The group was shocked by this. Then they saw Diane grip her fist and say, "Let me say this to your face. I won't lose to some holy knight." Everyone then began running as Diane began to chase them, and as they were running, they noticed a man and a child walking. They all grabbed the two before they hid in a ditch. They all peeked over the edge to see that Diane had stopped and was now looking for them. Kurinai then noticed that Diane's eyes were clouded over, and she then understood what was happening. "She's in an illusion." Everyone looked at Kurinai in shock before she explained, "Her eyes are clouded over so she wasn't able to see us." Diane must have been seen and got caught in the illusion that makes her see Meliodas as the holy knight that casted the illusion. Everyone then had wide eyes at realizing this. But then Kurinai continued, And earlier, she was fine and talking to us. But then a bell ringing was heard and she then began attacking us, so it had to be caused by a bell. Kurinai was still explaining, but then she trailed off as she stared at something with narrowed eyes. And everyone began to look at where she was staring, where they saw the boy and the man. They all then noticed the boy's staff had a little bell on it. This caused everyone to be on alert. "Who are you?" shouted Kurinai. "You are clearly behind this turn of events, so who are you?" The boy began chuckling before he was replaced with a holy knight. This one was wearing deep blue armor, with a long black skirt. He was wearing a helmet that looked like a human face and had 22 holes on both sides, and in his hand was a larger version of the staff the boy was previously holding. "Well, you seem to have caught on rather quickly. My name is Ruin of the Weird Fangs, and I will be the one to bring ruin to the 7 deadly sins." At this same time, the group then heard buzzing and looked up to see more insects coming their way. They then also heard a loud boom, and turned to also see Meliodas and Diane fighting, when they noticed that Meliodas now had clouded eyes as well. The group decided to then split up. Anko, Hinata, and Satsuki would deal with the bugs, Kurinai, Naruto, and Hana would try and break Diane and Meliodas out of the illusions, and finally Kushina and Tenten would deal with Ruin. The group then separated and headed off to do their tasks, and they all thought the same thing. "Damn, this is going to suck." Back in base dungeon. While this was all going on, there was a bit of excitement also happening back at base dungeon. "Find the 7 sins ban. The fox sin of greed," shouted Jericho. Right away, but Lady Jericho, began one of the many knights that were currently in the hall. "Why are you dressed like that?" finished another knight. "You see, right now, Jericho is sitting on the floor in nothing but her pink, frilly bra and panties, with only her coat to cover herself, even though it was slightly shortened." Jericho was blushing brightly, and said, "Never mind that. Now, go get me a change of clothes and my suit of armor." The knights were just staring and leering at her with lust, making Jericho feel very uncomfortable, before she shouted, "What are you waiting for? I said go." With that, the group of knights began running to get what Jericho needed, with one standing in place staring at her for a little longer before another knight came back and grabbed him, taking him away. Before they were all gone, "I can't believe he was right," she said, while remembering what Ban had told her before she had been found. Flashback. A couple minutes ago, Ban was currently holding Jericho up by her cheeks with his hand underneath her chin. She dropped her sword, as she was having a hard time breathing, and said, "Just finish me." But she was surprised when Ban instead simply lowered her so she could breathe easily again, which caused her to begin coughing, before he said, "You know, despite whatever stories were told about me and the others, we're not actually the bad guys. It's the holy knights that you serve that are the bad guys." Jericho was surprised by this and exclaimed, "That's a lie. The holy knights are the good guys. They're ones who are trying to protect this country." "Yes, but from whom and at what cost?" This question threw Jericho for a loop, as she began to think about it, but she wasn't allowed to think for long before Ban continued, "You see, if the holy knights are supposed to be these good guys that you believe, then why are they causing problems for people? Why are they threatening people for supplies instead of simply requesting them? Why are they raping innocent women? And also, if they were such good guys, then why are they the ones who are causing so many issues? And all of this was done in the name of the holy knights." Jericho began to really think about this, because she didn't want to believe that the holy knights were really that bad. But as she thought about it more, she began to realize that he was right. She had tried to ignore it, but she remembered her teacher, Vermilion Sensei, also saying how the holy knights had a dark secret. She remembered her teacher telling her how, if it wasn't the only way to keep them from corrupting her, who was such an honest and righteous soul, she would never have joined the holy knights. "If what you say is true, then why have I not seen it for myself?" asked Jericho. Ben answered by saying, "That is because you are never in the right place at the right time and never look in the right direction. But I will help by putting you in the right position, so that you can see exactly what I mean. Just don't hate me for what I will have to do." And with that, Ban's voice began to echo and fade. Flashback, and Jericho, still with her blush and clutching the coat to her body, said, "I still don't like how I had to go through with this." She then began to blush even darker when she remembered what he told her after taking her armor and clothes. "But, at least he told me I have nothing to be ashamed about." With Ban, after discarding Jericho's clothes and armor because of them not fitting, is now walking through base, looking around a couple of cells, when he sees a short, fat, and ugly knight crouching in front of a cell, looking inside with a look of lust. Ban, curious as to what the man is looking at, walks over and asks, "What you looking at?" The knight then responded by saying, "Her. Isn't she a fine woman?" Ban then looked inside the cell and saw a woman currently chained to the wall. She has shoulder-length, lightish brown hair, soft, brown eyes, and was wearing a pair of glasses. She was also wearing a white blouse that hugged her D-cup breasts, with a dark blue, long-sleeved shirt over that. She was also wearing a long, white skirt with a belt and sandals. She looked very beautiful, but currently, she looked very cute as she looked back at them with an embarrassed blush on her cheeks. The knight then explained how Galgius had kidnapped her, and that her name was Sinet, and that she was the daughter of a doctor in Dalmari. "I just can't get enough of her. It's alright if we take her, right? I mean, no one is looking," Ben then said. "I like her." This got the knight to look at him. "Hey, I was here first." "Who are you?" Ben simply smiled at the man, before he slammed the guy's head into the bars, knocking him out, and slightly scaring Sinet. She then watched as Ben gave her a lazy smile, while raising his hand to show her he meant no harm. He then reached for the bars, and then bent all of them to the side before entering the cell. Sinet was shaking as she watched the man advance towards her, fearing that he would do something to her. Ben then crouched in front of her, and lightly cupped her chin with his right hand, before he began moving it towards her shirt, while saying, "I'll be." His hand then went in between her dark blue shirt and blouse. This caused Sinet to shut her eyes in fear for the worse, before he then pulled out a dagger, while he finished saying, "Borrowing your dagger." Sinet saw this and said, "My father gave me that to protect myself." Ben looked at the dagger, before he went on to describe the dagger, before he then waved his arm to the side, slicing the chains off of Sinet and the wall, and finished by saying that the sharpness wasn't bad. Ben then crouched back down in front of Sinet, and said with a soft smile, "Your father must love you very much to give an excellent blade like this." Sinet began to blush at Ban's smile, before she then accepted the dagger back and said, "Thank you for giving this back. While it given to me to protect myself, it was also my mother's memento." Ben smiled at her before he stood up, and offered her a hand, which she gratefully took and stood up with his help. As the two were beginning to exit the cell, they heard a voice address Ban. "Where do you think you're going, Ban of the 7 deadly sins?" Ban and Sinet turned and saw another holy knight standing in the hall, looking in their direction. This one was wearing dark-colored armor with spikes all over his armor. He was carrying a shield that had spikes all around the perimeter with a rose insignia on it. His helmet looked like a bunch of purple, metal vines that covered his face, only leaving one red eye visible. He then added, "You are going to die right here and now." Ben simply smirked and said, "Yo, Holy Knight Jude." Behind him, Sinet looked at Ban and was thinking, "This man is one of the 7 deadly sins. You're going to kill me? Why do it now?" asked Ban. "We have no more use for you. You were simply bait for the sins captain, and you've fulfilled that role," explained Jude, before he continued, "My fellow knights should be finishing up with your 2 fellow sins right about now. And once I've killed you, there will be 4 less criminals in the world." Ben simply began chuckling before he said, "I hope your dream comes true." Jude then asked, 5 years ago, who was it that caught and tortured you, or have you forgotten?" Ben simply stared at Jude with a stoic look while saying nothing. Back with the others, the group was having a tough time against the Holy Knights considering there were 2, and almost half of their group was trying to break the illusions on Meliodas and Diane. They wouldn't have as much of an issue fighting the 2, if it wasn't for the fact that one of them can fight with bugs almost exactly like an Abu Rami, while the other can cast illusions like no tomorrow. All in all, it was not easy. Right now, Anko, Hinata and Satsuki were trying to stop the bug using Holy Knight. Anko and Satsuki were using multiple Gokaku no Jutsus to burn all the bugs, while Hinata was using her clan's hack Kusho in order to send blasts of air, annihilating large groups of bugs as well. It was an incredibly slow process, and they needed a lucky break or else they would run out of chakra. As that was going on, Kushina and Tenten were fighting against Ruin, who kept casting illusions at them, which they had to stop and then focus on breaking out of them. But every time they did this, they gave Ruin the chance to attack them, which he always took. It was now beginning to get on their nerves on how he fought, because they thought he would be physically weak since he used illusions. But that turned out to be very wrong when he would launch an attack that would send them skidding back several feet. They had to be on their toes the entire time, but it wasn't easy since they would never know when he would cast an illusion, until it was too late. This led to them being covered in bruises and scratches from Ruin's attacks and skidding on the ground. Meanwhile, Hana and Naruto were all trying to stop Diane and Meliodas from moving around so much in order for Kurenai to break them of the illusions they were currently under. Naruto was trying to use her chains to tie up the two sins, but they were so strong and quick that it was very difficult for Naruto to get a proper hold on one of them. "Come on, damn it!" exclaimed Naruto. "Just sit still long enough for us to help." Naruto was trying again to stop Diane so that Kurenai could break them out of it. Hana was using some Doton jutsus to try and slow them down. They kept trying and trying, until finally they caught a lucky break when Hana managed to turn the ground into thick mud that made it hard for Diane and Meliodas to move, which gave Naruto the opportunity to wrap her chains around Diane's torso and legs along with Meliodas as well, but they were beginning to struggle, which made it difficult for Naruto to keep her hold on them. "Kurenai! Do it now! While I still have a hold on them!" exclaimed Naruto, who was sweating and panting very hard because of how much focus and energy it was taking her to hold the two sins in place. Kurenai nodded her head and rushed between Meliodas and Diane, before she put her hands in the ram's seal and then shouted "Kai!" while sending out a burst of chakra that made them both stop struggling, before they both then shook their heads and looked very confused. Why are we being held in chains?" asked Diane, who was greatly confused on what happened along with Meliodas. "You were both caught in an illusion that made you think the other was a holy knight in order to attack each other, in an attempt to destroy the other," explained Naruto, as she began to release Diane and Meliodas from her chains. The two were surprised at this, before they got angry expressions on their faces, and turned to see the two holy knights that were still there. Meliodas and Diane glanced at each other before they nodded and took off for their respective targets, with Meliodas heading towards Ruin and Diane heading towards Frisia. When Meliodas got to Ruin, he grabbed his arm tightly, bending the metal to his grip, while saying, "You are a terrible knight." This surprised Ruin as he exclaimed, "The spell was broken." Meliodas then punched Ruin in the stomach with so much force he broke the ground and launched Ruin into the wall of base dungeon. This surprised all of the knights who were outside around base dungeon as lookouts. Meliodas was moving towards Ruin, who tried to attack him, but Meliodas had dodged all of the attacks before he then slammed his fist into Ruin's torso, shattering the man's armor. "You managed to break my armor, impressive," said Ruin. "Did you think I would say something like that?" exclaimed Ruin before he showed his 8-pack abs. "This armor is nothing more than shallow skin. My true armor is this body, which is harder and stronger than steel." Ruin then looked forward and exclaimed, "Well, what are you going to do now?" However, he wasn't expecting Meliodas to bury his fist so far into his body that it threatened to come out of his back. Ruin began coughing up blood before he was launched towards the wall of base again. Meliodas then said, "You tried to turn me and my friend against each other. That is your sin." Back inside base with Ban. Back inside, we find Sinette back inside her cell, peeking past the corner with a worried look. She was watching as Jude had put a spike through the center of Ban's chest. Ban had blood coming from his mouth, the hole in his chest, and was against the wall being held there by Jude, who's holding the spike. Jude was in Ban's face when he began by asking, "Is it painful?" Jude then moved to be in Ban's face when he continued, "Didn't I already say it? You already filled your role, Fox's sin. Ban. Do you know why I was captured by you 5 years ago?" asked Ban. Jude just scoffed and said, "You make it sound like you got captured by me on purpose. Back then I wanted pain," Ban said, surprising both Jude and Sinette, who was still watching, before Ban continued, "I wanted the feeling of pain, in order to be punished for my past. But I think I've been punished enough." Ben ended with a bloody smile, as he grabbed the spike and began to pull it out. Ben looked over to Sinette and said, "I don't want you to think badly of me, so could you please turn around or go back into the cell? I will call you out when I am done." Sinette nodded slowly before she went back inside the cell, where she then heard the sound of metal and flesh being pierced, which caused her to flinch. "You see, I thought I had failed my group, and that they all died. That is why I wanted to feel pain, but you just told me the captain is alive. That means that I no longer need to blame myself, so I no longer need to be punished," Ban said. As it turned out, that Ban had returned the favor and stabbed Jude in the center of his chest straight through his armor. Jude began to talk in a shaky voice that was slowly growing weaker. "Why, you're plotting the same thing from 10 years ago, aren't you? To overthrow the kingdom? Well, just know that every single holy knight in the K kingdom will declare war on the 7 deadly sins. Ben just looked at Jude, before saying, you seem to messed in the head, because we never tried to overthrow the kingdom. And with that, Jude died before his body began sliding to the ground. Ben sighed before he moved to the cell where Sinette was still inside, and said, hey, sorry you had to hear all of that. I hope I didn't scare ya. Sinette looked at Ben with slightly fearful eyes, before she saw his slightly sheepish expression with his still lazy eyes. Sinette began to calm down, before she shook her head, no, showing she wasn't scared of Ben. Ben gave a small smirk, before he offered his hand to her, which she gratefully took, before they began moving, to try and find an exit. Outside base dungeon, the knights were now very fearful at Ruin being defeated. They then heard another crash and turned to see that it was Frisia who had crashed into the ground, without most of her armor, with the only pieces left being her left boot and her right gauntlet. Frisia can now be seen as quite the beautiful woman, despite the multiple bruises, scratches and cuts. She had a curvy figure as seen by her double D-cup breasts that were hugged inside of her sleeveless, pinkish red leotard which showed a great amount of cleavage and had a diamond cutout that revealed her smooth stomach. She also had black arm and leg warmers. She had light brown hair and soft brown eyes that currently showed she was in a great amount of pain. This caused the knights to begin running away and not looking back. She muttered, damn, I knew these 3 were dumbass. I hate how the holy knights are now. So, why did I join these guys? She thought no one heard her but Diane, who had been moving towards her to knock her out, did and was surprised by this. She had never expected there to be holy knights who don't like being holy knights. She then moved over and gently lifted Frisia up to her face before asking in a quiet tone, so that only the 2 of them knew what was being said. Do you really not like the holy knights? Frisia looked up at Diane with eyes that were as widened as possible, considering all the pain she was in, before she replied, no, I originally joined because I thought the holy knights were actually good, but then I watched and experienced how they actually aren't. I watched knights steal from the people we were supposed to help, kill the people, cause problems, and rape people. I experienced their evilness because they took advantage of the fact that I'm a woman and made it almost impossible to get where I am. They made it where anything I did was taken by someone else, and they received the credit. They made it where I had to give my body to higher rank knights just to get the credit of any missions I did, and I hated it. Frisia at this point had begun to cry from remembering the suffering and hardships she went through and saw while a part of the holy knights. Diane was appalled at all of the suffering Frisia went through, especially since they did this to their own knights. Diane was also angered by how someone wasn't recognized for their achievements, and could only gain the recognition by giving up her body. Finally, Diane was disgusted by how low the holy knights have fallen, by actually demanding that one of their female knights give up her body, just to be able to reach a higher position. Diane thought for a second before she asked, well, if you hate the holy knights so much, why do you stay with them? Frisia then looked up at Diane with wide eyes that had tears in them, before she began to think about it. Why did she stay with the holy knights? They did nothing good for her, or the people. She had joined them because she thought they were the good guys, but were they? No! They were not. They were terrible people, who had caused the suffering of the people. They were the ones who killed innocent people with no remorse. And they were the ones who took her virginity, that she had been saving for when she finds someone to love. I don't know anymore, but I don't want to stay. That is for sure, said Frisia. Diane then softly smiled and asked, how would you like to come with us then? Frisia was surprised by this sudden offer, before she began to smile softly while closing her eyes, and replied, yeah, I would like to come along. Diane nodded before she slowly and gently took off her bag before she opened it, and began to softly place Frisia inside. Before Diane closed it, however, Frisia said, thank you for helping me. I would like to return the favor now, by telling you where the doctor's daughter and the sin are. Diane looked surprised before she nodded her head and said, thank you, and don't worry. Once we get back to town, we'll make sure you're taken care of until you're all better. Frisia smiled and said, thank you, and you are looking for the round building of the dungeon on the right side. That is where the 2 of them are. Diane smiled and said, thank you for that information. Now get some rest, you're still really hurt. Frisia nodded her head, before she closed her eyes and began to sleep. Diane closed her bag, then she slowly and carefully put it back on, before she walked over and met the Kunoichi, Elizabeth, Hawk, and Meliodas. Meliodas then asked, "So, did you find out where they are?" He then looked back to where she came from and asked, "And what happened to the Holy Knight you were fighting?" "Yeah, the Holy Knight told me they're over there in the round building on the right-hand side," Diane said, while pointing to the building she was told. "As for where she is," began Diane before she pointed to her bag, "she surprised me. It turned out, she didn't like the Holy Knights anymore, and she wanted to leave, so I put her inside of my bag, where she is sleeping right now. I promised her that after we get Ban and the doctor's daughter, she would receive medical attention." Everyone was surprised to hear that a Holy Knight didn't like being a Holy Knight anymore, and instead wanted to go with them. Then the Kunoichi and Elizabeth smiled at how kind Diane was, for accepting and helping an enemy who no longer wished to be an enemy. "Well," began Meliodas, "let's head on inside." The group then began to move towards the entrance before they all went inside. Once they went inside, the entrance was sealed. Before there was an exclamation of, "The entry has been sealed with the Sins and their accomplices inside." Jericho, who was now in some clothes and new armor, turned and asked, "What are your order, Sir Galgius?" "We find a heavily damaged Galgius, with breaks, dents, and cracks all over his armor, standing as best he can, before he said, 'I'm impressed, 7 deadly sins.' To deal such a blow to the Weird Fangs and turn one of us against the rest." Galgius then held a small black orb between his fingers, that had a symbol on it, before he continued, "However, that strength has instead invited your agonizing death." Jericho looked at Galgius in shock for what he held in his hand. "That's an incantation orb," she exclaimed before she began thinking, "If he activates that, then they won't be able to come back out ever. That means I won't be able to see Ban again to thank him." As Jericho realized that she won't be able to see Ban again, Galgius answered, "Correct. It's an incantation to trigger the trap." Galgius then threw the orb down to the ground, causing a thick purple smoke to appear, before it grew and slowly began to cover the entirety of base dungeon. "This is the counter trap for the 7 deadly sins, the Eternal Seal spell. It is a seal so powerful that they wouldn't be able to break it, even with 10 tyrant dragons." "Ha ha 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 ha." Galgius then began laughing like a madman, thinking that the 7 deadly sins won't be able to escape. Meanwhile, Jericho was feeling distraught at that, because she had wanted to meet Ben again, in the future after she received more training from her teacher. Please, let them find a way out," Jericho mentally prayed, so that the other knights around her won't be able to hear her. Inside base dungeon, the group were walking through base looking for where Ban and Sinet might be, when they came up to a part that was only human-sized. "It's too narrow for me to keep going," complained Diane. However, from the door came Sinet, who was surprised to see all of them. "Oh, hello, my name is Sinet, and I'm the daughter of a doctor in Dalmari town. You wouldn't happen to know a way out of here for me and my friend, would you?" Sinet asked after introducing herself. Everyone was surprised to have found the doctor's daughter so easily, which was voiced by Diane. "Wait, if you're Dr. Dana's daughter, then who?" Diane's voice began to trail as they heard footsteps coming from the door, before they all saw Ban come out of the door, and standing next to Sinet with his hands in his pockets, and slightly slouched. When everyone saw him, they all had different reactions. Diane began to smile brightly at seeing her friend. Elizabeth, Hinata, and Kurinai began to blush at his muscular, shirtless self. Anko, Tenten, Hana, and Satsuki began to stare at his body lustfully, but it was Kushina and Naruto looked on with smiles at seeing that they found Ban. "Naruto!" exclaimed Kurami from inside Naruto's head, getting her to jump slightly, which was noticed by Kushina. "What? What is it? Is something wrong?" Naruto asked Kurami in her mind, fearing that something happened. "That's him. That's Naruto!" exclaimed Kurami, causing Naruto to go wide-eyed, which made Kushina curious and slightly worried for Naruto. "Naruto, what's wrong?" asked Kushina. However, before Naruto could answer, they heard Meliodas talk. "Ban?" asked Meliodas. "Hey, Captain," replied Ban. Now, it was silent as the two stared at each other with tense looks. The atmosphere also felt tense, as everyone could feel the tension. "They both seem upset. What's going on? I've got a bad feeling about this," said Hawk, slightly scared. Diane then sat on the ground and said, "You're right. I think all of you may want to get behind me and hide there." This scared Hawk even more, and he let out a whimper. Sinet also moved over the group as well. Meliodas and Ban continued to stare at each other, before they then narrowed their eyes a bit. Then, Bayan! Exclaimed a happy Meliodas as he raised his arms high in the air. Captain? Exclaimed a happy Ban, who had put his hands up. The two began running towards each other, laughing, before they began to slap each other's hands multiple times. The Konoichi sweat dropped at the sight of two of Britannia's worst criminals acting like children, while Sinette, Diane, and Elizabeth giggled at their actions. Hawk asked, "What's that? A game of patty cake gone horribly wrong?" They then watched as Ban raised both his arms up with a smile and exclaimed, "Captain!" before he slammed both arms into Meliodas, sending him flying through multiple walls, before he finally came to a stop. Everyone went wide-eyed at this, as they had never expected Meliodas to just get sent flying through walls. "Ha ha! My turn! Me next! Ha ha!" Ban exclaimed, laughing while jumping up and down and waving his arms. Meliodas then came flying into Ban and headbutted Ban, and sent him flying through multiple walls as well. The whole hall was shaking from the two sins' antics, and Diane just looked bored, with Hawk asking, "Do I want to know?" "Just roll with it," Diane answered boredly with a sigh. The two were now laughing, with Ban still laying down where he got knocked, and Meliodas was giggling, while bent over, holding his knees. "So great. I thought you might have gotten soft on me," Ban said, while getting up and looking no worse for wear, except for some dirt and a couple of scratches. Meliodas then began to dust off his shoulder, before he said, "You've still got it." The two then clasped their right hands together, and slammed down onto the floor looking like they were about to arm wrestle. "Ready?" Ban said slowly. "Go!" Meliodas exclaimed. The two then began to wrestle, and the amount of strength that the two were using caused cracks to start spreading everywhere with the two of them at the center of it all, the walls all beginning to break down, just from the two sins having an arm wrestle match. Hawk was now sitting on Diane's knees, and was exclaiming, "What's happening?" Diane now had a soft smile as she watched the captain and her object of affection enjoy their reunion. "Those two have been like that as long as I've known them." The Konoichi all heard Diane and all exclaimed along with Hawk, "They've been like what?" "Just typical boys, so immature," Diane replied. As the rest of the group were watching this, Ban and Meliodas began talking. 720 times. "If I recall correctly, and I do, I beat you 361 of them," Ban said. "You must have lost your mind. I've won 361 times," Meliodas rebutted. The building and hall just kept falling apart, but Meliodas and Ban were ignoring that, and simply began putting in more effort as heard by them shouting. Meliodas and Ban were somehow still lying on solid pieces of stone's arm wrestling the whole way down, not caring about the building they were destroying from their match. The rest of the group were all falling down as well, with Sinette being held by Kushina, and Elizabeth being held by Naruto. All of the Konoichi were falling calmly, with Elizabeth and Sinette holding on to Naruto and Kushina like their lives depended on it. Diane simply fell calmly before saying, "Ban looks so handsome right now." "I don't think this is the time," exclaimed Hawk, before he began screaming. Back with the knights outside, all of the knights watched in shock as the spell seal was taken down, and base dungeon was being completely destroyed. Galgius exclaimed in shock, "The barrier!" While the other knights were watching in shock and were shouting in fear, Jericho, however, was shocked and was thinking, "Amazing! Just how much power do the sins even have?" Then Jericho began blushing as she remembered that Ban was also one of the sins. Then she felt herself beginning to get a little hot between her legs, before she snapped out of it and shook her head. "Damn it, teacher! Why did I have to also pick up your like of strong men who can overpower me?" She shouted mentally, embarrassed that she picked up her teacher's love of strong men. With that last thought, Jericho heard Galgius shout, "Strategic withdrawal," and all the knights began to run away. Jericho took one last look at the falling ruins of Base Dungeon, before she smiled and began running with the rest of the knights. Rubble of Base Dungeon. The Konoichi were completely unharmed except for some dust, and were all making sure they were unharmed. They all saw they were fine, and also began to check on Sinette and Elizabeth, and saw they were fine too. Diane then looked around and saw that it was already dusk before she said, "Oh, it's already dusk. No wonder I was starting to get hungry." Hawk was covered in bumps, bruises, scratches and dirt while exclaiming, "You guys are all ridiculous." Ben was laying down on some rubble and looked up at Meliodas, who was standing, and with a grin, said, "Anyways, good to see you again, Captain." Meliodas simply looked down at Ban with a smile. Later, everyone was back at the doctor's building, when they checked on Frisia, and saw she was still sleeping, and decided to let her sleep. The Kunoichi were all smiling at being able to successfully help a civilian, and also find another of the 7 deadly sins. They were also especially happy that it was the sin they were looking for since they first arrived in Britannia. Elizabeth then suggested that they all go and make sure Sinet was alright, which they agreed before Ban saw something out of the corner of his eye and began to walk away. Diane noticed this and asked, "Ban? Where you going?" A little worried something might be wrong. This gained the attention of everyone else as well, who all turned to see Ban walking into town waving his back at them without turning around. "I'm gonna see if I can find some clothes." "Don't worry, Diane. I'll be back a little later," Ban said, getting relieved eyes from everyone. As everyone was smiling at everything turning out okay, only one person wasn't smiling. "Is it true? Are you my Oniai-chan?" wondered Naruto. Later at night, everyone is now relaxing on top of the doctor's building with some drinks. Off to the side, Frisia was covered in bandages and was sitting up to eat some fruit as well. Everyone was enjoying themselves when Meliodas gained everyone's attention. "Alright, everyone." Meliodas raised his voice a little. "Allow me to now formally introduce him. This is the fox's sin of greed, Ban." Ban was currently sitting on a barrel with his right leg up on the barrel and his left leg hanging off. He had his right elbow resting on his leg and was cupping his chin and part of his face with his thumb and index finger. He was wearing a blood-red leather jacket with matching pants that were all covered in metal studs. Ban then say, "Hello everyone. Nice to meet you." Meliodas then noticed Ban's change in wardrobe and said, "Whoa. Where'd you get that suit?" "Well, I can't very well parade around half naked in front of a princess, now can I?" Ban asked rhetorically. "How'd you buy clothes without any money?" Meliodas asked. "I kinda stumbled across him." Ban said, "It was a total fluke." Diane just looked to the side kinda upset, and sighed, which brought Ban's attention to her. "Hey, Diane. It's been a while, huh? How've you been?" "I've been fine. Not very happy you still have that habit of taking clothes that catch your eye," Diane said, which caused Ban to look slightly sheepish and scratch the back of his head. "Well, it's not like I had money during most of those times," Ban replied, getting Diane to look at him with a deadpan stare. "And the times you did have money?" Diane asked. "Hey, now that's not fair. You know very well that I spent that money on things such as food and supplies, or whatever you guys wanted. I only stole clothes because I never had enough for myself afterwards," Ban explained, getting Diane to think about it before she sighed and looked back at him with a smile. "I guess you're right. Sorry about that, it's just," Diane began, before Ban cut her off. I know. You don't like watching me steal things because then that makes people mad at me." "Don't worry, I remember," Ban said, while smiling at Diane, who smiled back. Began a voice from behind Ban, getting him to turn to a flustered-looking Elizabeth. "It's very nice to meet you, Lord Ban," she exclaimed while bowing. Ban looked uncomfortable. "It's okay, Your Highness. And we're not really big on ceremony, so let's just be friends, and please, just call me Ban," he said, with small smile. Elizabeth looked surprised before she, too, smiled and said, "Yeah, does that include me?" asked a voice. Ban was confused and looked at Meliodas before asking, "Captain, aren't we already friends? Why are you asking me again?" "He's not the one asking. Are you sure you don't have a couple of screws loose?" said the voice. Ben then gained a confused look. "Huh? Who said that?" "I did," Hawk said. Ben stared at Hawk for a second before exclaiming, "There's a talking pig here." Everyone began to laugh at Ban's antics. When Dr. Dana said, "Dinner's ready," everyone began to eat and were enjoying themselves. When Kushina exclaimed, "Oh, I almost forgot." Everyone began looking at Kushina as she pulled out a paper, a brush and some ink before she moved over to Diane. "Diane, I just remembered, I finally finished the seal." Diane looked at Kushina in shock before she began to smile brightly. "You're serious? You're not messing with me, right?" Kushina shook her head and said, "Nope. I finally finished it in the last couple of hours." "So, where do you want it?" Diane was smiling brightly before she moved her wrist to Kushina and said, "Right here." Kushina smiled and nodded before she began applying the seal. Once she was done, Kushina put the stuff away and said, "Alright, all done. Now, all you have to do is push some mana into the seal, and it'll activate." Diane nodded and began to focus. Everyone watched in rapt attention as suddenly, Diane was covered in a giant puff of smoke, and when it cleared, there stood Diane in her shrunken jumpsuit at a height of 5 feet and 5 inches. She looked herself over, before she began to smile brightly, and had tears of joy falling from her eyes. Diane then felt a pair of arms around her and looked up, to see Ban was the one holding her. Ben smiled at her and said, "Looks like you finally got your wish from all those years ago." Diane then remembered that she had told Ban that she wanted to be small in order to hug him, and he was right. She began to cry and hug Ban back, who returned the hug. They then released each other, before Ban started to walk back to the others, but was stopped by Diane, who held onto his sleeve, who had her head down. "HM? Diane?" asked Ban. Everyone was wondering what was happening, before they were all shocked when Diane suddenly leapt at Ban before she wrapped her arms around her neck and began kissing Ban. Ban was wide-eyed before he relaxed into the kiss and began to return it. Everyone was smiling at this, even Naruto, who saw that Ban and Diane had stopped kissing, and had decided to ask something that had been bothering her. "Excuse me, Ban." This got everyone's attention as Naruto moved towards the two sins. Ban turned towards Naruto, who had a serious look. "Yes, what is it?" Naruto began to breathe before she asked something that got everyone's attention. "I wanted to know," Naruto began, "are you my Onii-chan?" Everyone was surprised by this sudden question, before they all heard Naruto continue. "You see, my name is Naruto, and I am a Jinchuriki, and I hold the Kyuubi no Yoko, and she is able to tell that my brother is alive because he holds the rest of her chakra. When we arrived, she told me that he had been motionless for the past several years, and when I first saw you inside of base dungeon, she told me that you hold her chakra." Everyone was wide-eyed at this, and they all turned to Ban, who had his eyes shadowed. Ban then sighed, and looked at Naruto with a soft smile before saying, "I could never hide anything from you, right little sis?" Naruto was wide-eyed at this response, before she began to tear up and smile. Then she launched herself at him and began hugging him like crazy while saying, "I finally found you, Onii-chan." Ban just hugged her back and said, "Yes. Yes, you did." All of the Kunoichi, Meliodas and Diane, were all shocked to hear that Ban was actually Naruto. They didn't know what happened to him over the years, and they had so many questions, but they knew right now wasn't the time for questions. It was the time to celebrate, and so, the entire night, everyone celebrated for multiple reasons. For the safe return of Sinet, Diane being able to now be their size, and finally finding Naruto. Everyone celebrated like no tomorrow, but they knew that tomorrow was coming, and with it, a lot of answers to their unanswered questions. It's been a few days since the group found Ban and discovered that Ban is actually Naruto. The group of Kunoichi couldn't believe they finally found Naruto, and they decided that they would find out what happened to him after he was banished. However, they decided to wait for a while since they had some injuries and Frisia was still bedridden. Over the days, everyone pitched in to get everything they need for the journey, from food and clothes, to weapons and materials for weapons. Purchasing the materials confused the group of Kunoichi, until Meliodas and Diane revealed that Ban could actually forge some weapons and shields. This greatly surprised the Kunoichi, and they wanted to know when he had the time to learn blacksmithing, but figured they would ask later. Over the days, Ban and Diane also got closer and spent time together, with Ban telling Diane of other adventures he's had when he was a shinobi. Much to her pleasure. He also reconnected with Hinata, Hana, and Tenten. They took great pleasure in the compliments that Ban gave to them about how they grew, and even greater pleasure when he kissed and held them all. Currently, the group were all in the boar hat, except for Diane, who wanted to be in her giant form for now, looking over a map, going over the destinations they had been and where to go. "So let's see," Meliodas began, "we met Elizabeth and the Kunoichi here," he said while pointing to a spot on the map. "Then we reunited with Diane in the Forest of White Dreams, after taking down Fort Solgales." Hawk then added, "And finally, we found Ban or Naruto at base dungeon and are now on the mountain road, headed east from Dalmari." Ben then asked a question while pointing to the map, "Why don't we head to the kingdom's capital?" Meliodas replied, "Not yet. Right now, we're moving away from the kingdom, since we've caused quite a commotion by bringing down Fort Solgales and base dungeon. The knights will be on high alert, so it'll be harder to move around if we head closer to the capital." Ben nodded his head. "That's true, but we're catching a lot of attention already, considering we're a tavern on top of a giant green pig, with a cute giant walking next to us." Diane blushed hearing him, and then Ban stuck his head out and shouted, "Nothing against you, Hawk's mom. You're still really cool, oink. Oink, oink." Oink. Hawk's mom replied. She said, "No problem and thank you for the compliment." Diane said, with Hawk shocking her by confirming that was actually right. Elizabeth and Frisia were sitting on the porch of the tavern, enjoying the air and talking to one another with Frisia still having some bandages. After everything that happened, the two got to talking and actually found out that they had some stuff in common, such as wanting the kingdom to be better and a love for reading. Originally, Elizabeth was a little frightened by Frisia, but then slowly began to become friends with her as she saw that Frisia is actually very nice. "Thank you for helping me, and sorry about making you guys wait in Dalmari for 3 days." Frisia apologized to Diane, who simply looked and waved at her worries. "It's fine, there's no need to apologize, we're just glad that you're almost all better," replied Diane with Elizabeth smiling and nodding her head in agreement. Frisia smiled and said, "Thank you." Then she looked to the giant pig and said, "Sorry for making wait longer than planned." Oink oink oink. Hawk's mom oinked. "Don't worry about it," she says. Diane said, attempting to translate again, only to get Hawk to come running out with a tick mark, yelling, "Don't translate on your own." She said, "Next time, let me know in advance if it's gonna take a while." Diane just cutely knocked the side of her head while sticking her tongue out. Ben was watching this with a smile, before he turned to Meliodas and asked, "So any idea on where we're going next?" Before Meliodas could finish, they lurched forward as Hawk's mom suddenly stopped in front of two holy knights, who looked pretty weak and stupid. One had shoulder-length, wavy, blonde hair, puffed lips, and had armor covering only his left arm, that was also holding a spear. The other looked like a crescent moon due to his black hair and goatee being styled like a crescent with armor only covering his upper body. "Halt! We are holy knights of the kingdom. We received reports that the 7 deadly sins are within the area, and we know that Diane of the 7 deadly sins is of the Giant's clan, and there is a giant pig carrying a house on its back," said the blonde-haired knight. "Oh! Speak of the devil, we've run into a security check already," Meliodas said, getting everyone still inside to gather by the windows and door. "Holy knights, my ass?" Ban said, "They don't look like much. Probably just apprentices. Stupid ones at that." Ben then turned to Meliodas, "Leave this to me, Captain." Meliodas looked at Ban and nodded his head, before saying, "Make sure not to kill them, we don't want to attract even more attention than we already have." Ben nodded his head before heading out the door. The knights saw Ben coming out and walking to the edge before going, "Sup you two? How's it hanging?" With a goofy smile and a pair of eye smiles. This threw off the entire group except for Diane and Meliodas. The knights didn't mind and asked, "Not much, we wanted to know, what is this place?" Ben nodded in understanding before replying, "Well, this here is a traveling tavern known as the Boar Hat, and we're currently heading to our next destination. What can I do for you?" "We wanted to know what you're doing with a woman of the Giant's clan?" asked one of the knights. "She's one of our attractive waitresses," answered Ban, getting Diane to blush prettily. "We got some other attractive and cute waitresses as well. Like these two right here," Ban exclaimed while holding Elizabeth and Frisia with his arms around their waists. This got the two of them to blush heavily, while inside Meliodas twitched when Ban wrapped his arm around Elizabeth, which was caught by Kushina. Meanwhile Hannah, Hinata, and Tenten were smiling while shaking their heads at his antics. And then continued while still holding the two girls, "We also got our boss, who's also the owner, then me, the head chef of this here tavern and my sous chefs." The two knights were looking at Ban with narrowed eyes for a second, before they got excited with one knight exclaiming, "This is a new trend," while the other blushed while looking at Diane and exclaimed, "Awesome! She's cute!" Ben then snapped the two out of their thoughts by saying, "Anyways, we don't open while traveling, but I'm pretty sure the boss will hook you up with some discounts if you want a drink. And if you ever find us stop somewhere, come on in and we'll serve you up some food and drinks." The two knights didn't suspect a thing, so they allowed them to pass with smiles. Ban and Hawk, who walked up behind him a few seconds ago, talked about how the two were idiots, and they were thankful for their stupidity. As soon as the knights allowed them to pass, Ban was picked up by Diane, who then proceeded to rub him against her cheek while exclaiming, "Thanks, Ban. Me, an attractive waitress. I'm super happy." This, however, got the attention of the two knights who were still standing there. "Ban?" They thought for a second before realization hit them. "Hey, wait a second. You're the recently escaped prisoner, undead Ban of the 7 deadly sins." At this, Hawk said, "Amen, we've also got an idiot." However, all of a sudden, An extremely fast creature came charging out of the forest, and was now running around the two holy knight apprentices. Seeing this, however, set Ban on edge and he shouted, "Diane! Put me down!" Getting Diane to put him on the floor. As Diane put down Ban, the two holy knight apprentices were then rapidly attacked and disappeared, with the only sound left being that of crunching, until there was a loud swallowing sound and the creature finally stopped to spit out the leftover ruined, empty armor. Upon seeing what it was, Hawk began fearfully stuttering, "Awawawa, this isb bad. That's a black hound." The creature was indeed a black hound, however, contrary to the name, the dog was anything but black. It had blue-green fur with yellow markings running down its legs and across its face with two matching yellow manes of thick fur. It had a large, long mouth full of razor-sharp teeth and was currently glaring at Ban with its red eyes and drooling. Hawk then continued, "They say that once they have you in their sight, it'll hunt you down and won't stop until either it's done with you or you die. It's an insanely vicious monster." This set the Kunoichi on edge at hearing how dangerous this creature was. But then they grew fearful when they saw Ban begin walking up to it with his hands in his pockets. They tried to call out to him to come back, but he ignored them and just kept walking until he was right in front of the beast. He looked at the black hound with a bored look, meeting the hound's eyes, and they began having a staring contest. The two continued to stare at each other, with the others watching curiously, until they suddenly began to feel an extremely heavy pressure in the area. All originating from Ban, who was still staring at the black hound. The two sins weren't really bothered by the pressure, but the Kunoichi were all staring at him with wide eyes. The reason was because the pressure felt exactly like when Kurami went on a force rampage, all those years ago. Everyone watched as the black hound slowly began to back up, which Ban caught, before he then greatly increased the pressure, causing everyone to see the ethereal image of an angry, snarling Kyuubi no Yoko. The black hound saw this, and bent down with its ears and tail down. Ben then began to walk up to it, with the black hound watching him, and when he got close enough, Ben began to move his right hand towards the black hound. The hound in question closed its eyes, expecting the worst, and flinched once it felt his hand on its head. However, it grew greatly confused, when instead of death or pain, it felt the hand ruffling its fur, and looked up to see Ban with a soft smile and lazy eyes that showed kindness with all the pressure now gone. "We entered your territory, didn't we?" Ban asked, getting the hound to tilt its head. Ben then continued, "We're sorry about that." He then removed his hand and began to back up, allowing the hound to stand. He then nodded his head and said, "Go on." The hound was greatly surprised but then just took off, back into the forest. Everyone was amazed at this display, especially the Kunoichi. Ben walked over and jumped back on top, to rejoin everyone, before he looked to Meliodas and asked, "So, what was our destination again?" Meliodas got a smile and exclaimed, "The destination is the capital of the dead. We'll look for King there." Then the group began moving towards their destination again. Ben looked at Meliodas, "Alright, but last I heard he was dead. So, if it's true, we'll probably only find his grave to pay our respects to the damn fat ass." Meliodas replied, "True, but it's also the only lead we've got and I still can't believe you still hate each other." Ben, who looked frustrated even with his bored and lazy look, answered, "It wasn't even my fault. I hardly even knew him when we first met, and he still didn't like me. I hadn't even done anything to him, and he was pissed with me. I mean, sure, I played pranks on him like dressing him up in a dress and makeup or replacing his salt with sugar and other stupid stuff, but that was afterwards and even then, that wouldn't warrant that kind of reaction." Meliodas and Diane, who was now human-sized, nodded their heads, with Diane saying, "Yeah, I remember that. He also seemed especially mad whenever you and I hung out together. Like you were something terrible, and were doing something to me." Ben looked at Diane, shot his arms up into the air and exclaimed, "Thank you. I mean, I would understand if he was upset or annoyed with me for the pranks, but to straight up hate me, and then loathe me for hanging out with you." Ben then began to shake his head. "I never understood that fat ass." Meliodas and Diane gave him looks of sympathy, before Meliodas said, "Well, we can't do anything about that right now, but maybe if we find him, we can figure out what's wrong." Ben sighed before he nodded his head with a slight smirk and his still lazy look, and replied, "Yeah, thanks you too." "No problem, Ban," Diane said with a smile, before she covered her mouth and had wide eyes. "Oops, guess we should call you Naruto now, huh?" she asked, while looking sheepish. Ben then shook his head, "It's fine. I actually feel more comfortable being called me Ban, since that's what you've been calling me for the past 16 years. He said with a slight, soft smile and his still lazy eyes. The Konoichi who were in the room all went wide-eyed at hearing that he had known Diane for 16 years when he had only been banished for 4 years. They narrowed their eyes, since they already knew something was up and they had decided they would get answers tonight. Meanwhile, far away from the group, was a house owned by Holy Knight Gilthunder. Currently, there were 2 people inside said house. One was the very owner wearing some civilian clothes, while the other looked to be a floating child with orange hair and brownish-orange eyes. He was wearing a long orange and aqua sweatshirt with a hood and navy blue sleeves. He also wore quarter-length navy pants and short boots with large buttons that match his sweatshirt. He was also holding a green leopard-style pillow. The thing that drew attention, however, was the red grizzly mark on the outside of his left leg, just above his ankle. This was the grizzly sin of Sloth, King, and he was currently staring outside the window, in the direction where he could feel the other sins, or more specifically, Ban. I've got some interesting information for you. Fort Soul Gales was destroyed by an unknown woman with strange abilities. Base Dungeon and the Weird Fangs were annihilated with one of them joining the group traveling with the sins. Finally, Ban has joined up with Meliodas and Diane and a group of women traveling with them. Gilthunder told King. King replied, "Really? I don't know why they decided to make their move now, but if Ban had stayed quiet and in prison, then he wouldn't have become my target. I hope you're not betraying my trust, King?" questioned Gilthunder. King furrowed his brow at that and said, "Trust? Sorry, but can you keep stuff like that between you humans? I've got my own way of doing things which is pretty convenient for the both of us, wouldn't you say?" Gilthunder just sighed and said, "Yeah," before he felt presence at the door and asked, "Who is it?" Only for the black hound from before to walk in looking smaller and happier than before. King floated over to him and said, "Welcome back. Did you find him?" With the hound barking its response, Gilthunder watched as King was talking to the hound before reaching into its mouth, and said, "This is no time to be occupied with a worthless dog." King then pulled his hand out to show he was holding the crests of the 2 knights who were eaten and said, "Hey, Gilthunder. Pass this message along to your worthless dogs. If they get in my way, I'll finish them along with him, got it?" Later, Borhat. It was now night, and the group were still making their way to the capital of the dead when they decided to stop and make camp. Everyone was sitting around the fire, with Diane sitting in Ban's lap with him holding her. Next to him were also Hannah, Hinata and Tenten, who were enjoying having their boyfriend back, but they wanted answers now to quite a few questions they had for him. But before then, Meliodas decided to finally ask something himself. "Hey, Ban?" Ban looked over and said, "Yeah, Captain? What happened on that day 10 years ago?" Meliodas asked, getting everyone to now pay attention to Ban. Ban scratched the back of his head, before he looked over at the captain and said, "I'll tell you what I can at this moment in time." Everyone looked at Ban confused and Diane asked, "What do you mean?" Ban replied by saying, "I mean that I can only say what I am allowed, but the rest I can't for specific reasons that I also can't reveal until the right time." Meliodas took this information and accepted it, and said, "Alright, well, what can you tell us?" "I can tell you that the one who erased all of your guys' memories was the boar sin of gluttony, Merlin. When we find Gowther, he'll tell you the same as me, but the only thing is, he also tried to find the reason, but kept failing because she would constantly disappear." Ban revealed, shocking the group. "Merlin? But why?" asked Meliodas, greatly confused why Merlin would do such a thing. Ban shook his head. "I can't say because not even I knew what she was planning or the motives, same with Gowther." This got Diane and Meliodas to look down, before they heard Ban continue. "What I can tell you though, is that she didn't do this out of evil or bad intentions. She did this to you guys for a reason, she told me as much, so I didn't bother trying to find out why. I just let her go since she explained that she would eventually reveal what happened, and I accepted that. Gowther is the same, in that he doesn't know her motives, despite his attempts to find out." Meliodas and Diane seemed conflicted with this, but they knew that Ban wouldn't give them bad information or withhold information without reason, so they accepted this. After this, the Konoichi came forward, gaining the attention of the 3 sins. It was then Naruto who stepped forward, looking slightly nervous, and asked, "Oni-chan?" Ban turned towards Naruto and replied, "Yeah? What's up?" Naruto then asked, "Earlier, you were saying for them to call you Ban if it was easier, since that is what you've been called for the last 16 years. But you've only been banished from the village for 4 years. So, I wanted to know how that's possible. Meliodas and Diane looked curious and interested in this as well and turned to Ban. Ban looked at everyone before he sighed, and said, "Alright, I'll tell you what I know, but keep in mind that I'm still trying to figure it out myself." The group nodded and then Ban began to explain what happened. Flashback 2 years ago, a 16-year-old Naruto was currently walking around the country of Britannia after finally getting enough money to pay for the trip over. Currently, he was wearing a loose, white pirate shirt with baggy, black pants, and brown boots, with a bag thrown over his shoulder. He was just walking along a road, when he noticed a pair of cloaked people also walking down the road. He saw both of their bags containing their money, and then looked at little bag and figured they wouldn't mind if they have that much money. So, keeping his pace, he subtly cut their bags of money, quickly collected a few coins and kept walking, thinking he got away with it, until he sensed an attack heading his way, and dodged. He looked to see what had attacked him, and saw what looked to be a strange, small orb. He looked up, and came face to face with the sword that, judging by the arm holding the sword, is a man. Then the other person began to move over towards him, and just as he was about to perform a kawarimi, a breeze of wind blew the hood of the one in front of him off just enough for him to see a pair of gold eyes. He then heard the person say, "Time shift," with a voice that clearly proved this was a woman. Then there was a bright flash of light, and everything was gone. Flashback end. Then the next thing I knew, I was a baby and thrown almost 40 years into the past. Ben said, gaining shocked looks from everyone, especially from the Konoichi since he was basically 40 years old but still looked incredibly young. Before they could comment, Ban continued, "I was later found by these two people and they gave me the name Ban Fox. From then on, I was raised by them, if you could even call it that. Beating me for failing to steal food, money, or anything I was told, when I just gave it all to this little girl who looked like me. After a while, they tried to sell me to a noble, but I saw through it, and kicked the nobles and the smugglers' asses. Due to this, the people who had found me were arrested, and it was just me and the little girl who I decided to help take care of. So I continued stealing food, money, anything we needed. But then, one day she got sick because she wasn't eating enough. So, I began stealing extra food for her as well as medicine, but none of the usual places I stole from had medicine that was strong enough. Everyone saw him begin to grip his hands and realized how painful this was for him. They wanted to tell him to stop, but they knew he wanted to get this off his chest, so they let him continue. I stole enough medicine and food for her to last long enough by herself, just so I could make a trip to a nearby camp of knights that had taken all of the stronger medicine. I managed to get away after stealing some, but then one of the knights found me. I began to run, but they eventually caught me, only to reveal that he was also a thief and was trying to steal their weapons and money. His name was Zhivago, and he asked what I was planning with the medicine, so I told him. He then offered to help me back to the girl, but in exchange, I had to become an apprentice to his methods of stealing. I agreed without a second thought, and from there, we managed to help her and get her back up to full strength. But then that was the last time I saw her. After that, I traveled around stealing and learning from Zhivago. He even taught me about magic, how people sometimes have innate magic power that is unique to each individual. That was as far as we got before he was captured and imprisoned. From there, I eventually began traveling around stealing from various groups of people, but it was really only those who had more than they needed, like nobles and such. I eventually gained the name Bandit Band since I had been stealing from so many people. I eventually got noticed. A couple months later, I was captured and arrested by some holy knights, where they attempted to execute me. I was executed a total of 33 times and survived them all before I decided that it was boring. So I busted myself out of there, and then continued to wander around, until eventually I met Diane. This got Diane to smile, remembering the first time she met Ban. Ban caught this and lightly smiled before continuing. As she most likely told some of you, she and I began to travel around for a while, taking refuge where she was accepted, then camping out where she wasn't. Where I would then prank everyone in those villages like there was no tomorrow. Seeing his face and pumped fist made everyone laugh since they knew how much he cared for his friends and loved ones. Think Joey Wheeler's creepy chin and pumped fist look. Ben smiled before he then continued, getting everyone to quiet down as well. Eventually, we both joined the Holy Knights together and became part of the 7 Deadly Sins with the captain here. From there, The rest is history. We were framed for killing the great holy knight, Zaratras, and betraying the kingdom in an attempt to overthrow it. After that, we all went our separate ways, and hadn't seen each other for 10 years. Well, until now, that is. Everyone nodded, before Kushina remembered something. Oh, that's right. This got everyone's attention before she went back inside for a minute. She then came back outside with a scroll in hand before she handed it to Ban and said, "Here, this is why we were looking for you." Ban stared at the scroll for a second. He then took and unraveled it, before he began to read the contents. Meliodas and Diane watched how, as he read, his eyes slowly got wider and wider, until they eventually looked like they would pop out of his skull. Ban looked back at Kushina and asked, "Is this for real?" Kushina nodded her head, and said, "Yup. You've been allowed back into the village, and your bastard of a father was executed along with most of the civilian council, since it was discovered that those ones were unbelievably corrupt. And as it turns out, you were right that night all those years ago, as a little while after you were banished, a group of women came to the village where they told everyone how your team did attempt to rape them, but you only killed them, after trying to talk to them failed. After that, there was a deep investigation by the village ANBU, since they can also conduct investigations at their own discretion. They discovered that Minato had indeed been lying about the charges, and that all the money that was stolen had actually been taken by the civilian council allowed by Minato. And whenever the civilians would do something and were supposed to be arrested or executed, they would pay that money back to Minato, and he would let them go. It was then discovered that he also knew about Danzo keeping his root program active, and also allowed the old bastard to get away with kidnapping children from the clans. After all of this was found, the corrupted members of the civilian council, Minato, and the elders were all executed, and their assets all seized and returned to the Konoha reserves, spread among the village, and our clan received a hefty increase in finances that all came from their personal reserves. Ban was astounded and said, "That's amazing, but who's the Hokage now that Minato is gone?" "Well, that would be your godmother, Tsunade Senju. She became the Gondai Hokage after your father was executed," said Kushina. Ban, however, got confused. "Do I know her?" asked Ban. Kushina replied, "She was the woman you met and bet for her necklace after getting a bunch of debt collectors off her back. She had blonde hair, brown eyes, and another woman was with her holding a pig." Ben thought about it for a second, before he then placed his fingers on his wrist, confusing everyone, until in a puff of smoke, he was holding a necklace that had an emerald green crystal and a leather cord. Ben then held it up and asked, "You the lady I won this from?" Kushina nodded her head, getting Ben to then seal it away again, before she said, "Yup. She also set the record straight about who you are, and what you did for the village as a Jinchuriki. As well as, how if they had succeeded in killing you all those years ago, the Kyuubi would have been released and destroyed the village." Hearing this, the villagers changed their ways and began to hope you would come back in order to apologize for everything they did. After everything was said, Ban had wide eyes, shocked by all that had happened. He then looked to see that Elizabeth, Sinette, Frisia, Meliodas and Diane were all happy for him. Ben then looked back at Kushina and said, "Well, I guess I'll go back to the village." This got the Kunoichi to all smile and celebrate, until Ban cleared his throat, gaining their attention. Ben then continued, "However, I can't right now. It wouldn't be right to just up and leave while we're in the middle of our current job." This got the Sins, Frisia, Sinette and Kunoichi to all widen their eyes, but Elizabeth looked confused, until he looked at her and said, "Getting the rest of the Sins, and stopping the Holy Knights." Hearing this, Elizabeth grew a big smile, happy that her new friend wasn't going to just leave as soon as he could. "Now," Ban began, "let's eat then get some shut-eye. We still got a long journey ahead of us." And with that, everyone went inside the boar hat to eat then go to sleep. Ready for the journey ahead. Time skip. After a few days, the group had arrived at a small village. Meliodas was standing on Hawk's mom's nose with Hawk standing behind him. Diane was also walking next to them in her giant form with Ban on her shoulder, making some small talk about possible dates they could go on the next time they come across a town. Inside the boar hat, the Kunoichi getting their stuff together just in case any enemies appeared, as well as setting up to open shop. Meliodas then announced, "We're here." Hawk then asked, "Now that we're here, can I ask you something?" Meliodas said, "Sure, what's up?" "How in the world is a lonely village like that the capital of the dead?" asked Hawk. "Well, from what I've heard, this is the closest village to the capital of the dead," informed Ban. After a couple minutes, everyone was outside with Hawk's mom having dug herself underground to rest, while the boar hat was still visible. Everyone was listening to Meliodas as he began to explain what they were going to be doing. Alright, first, we have to gather information about King and the capital of the dead. From what I've been told, this is the closest village to the capital. And we have to earn money too, for food and supplies. So let's finish setting up, then we can open for business. Meliodas explained. You know, I didn't believe it at first, but now that I'm seeing it, I still can't believe that the captain is wait-end tables. Ben said to a human-sized Diane. Diane nodded. Yeah, I couldn't believe it either, but then I saw him working, and I guess I eventually got used to seeing it, more or less. Meliodas then pointed at Diane and Ban. Hey, don't forget. You guys are working too, he said, getting their attention, just like Ban said to those two holy night idiots. Ban, you'll be in charge of preparing and cooking delicious food, jailbreaking cook. Ban's eyebrow twitched at the nickname, but he didn't mind having to cook. Meliodas then looked to Diane, and Diane, you'll in charge of attracting customers, giant waitress. Diane's eyebrow also twitched a bit at the nickname, but she didn't mind working and changed to her regular size. Meliodas then turned to the others, ignoring Hawk's doubt towards Ban's cooking skills. Meliodas then said, well, you guys remember who are waitresses, and Frisia, you'll be joining them as well. They all nodded, understanding their job. Meliodas then turned to Sinet and Hannah. You two are going to set up a room so you can help any who are sick or injured. This way, they trust us even more and we can get information as payment for money instead if they can't pay. Meliodas then turned to the last three Kunoichi, and finally, you three will be working with Ban as his sous chefs. This way, we can take more orders and serve more people. The three nodded, and with that everyone began moving to start their tasks when suddenly Ban remembered something. Oh! Hang on, Captain! Ban said, getting everyone's attention. If it's money we need. They watched as Ban began to put his fingers to his wrist, and in a puff of smoke, there a big sack sitting on the floor. Opening the bag, Ban revealed it to be gold, jewels, expensive jewelry, weapons, and money, getting everyone's eyes to pop out at how much stuff and money he had in the bag. Ban then continued, we can just sell some of this when we get to the next large town or village. Meliodas decided to ask, while not taking his still wide eyes away from the bag of expensive commodities, where in the world did you get all of that? Ben gave his trademark smirk, said, well, I always made sure to steal just a bit extra for myself, so that I don't just start from scratch whenever I get arrested. And as for where this all came from, we got merchants, nobles, and holy knights, all of who were quite unfortunate to become my targets. Everyone nodded, understanding where he was coming from and how it's better to have something prepared in case anything happens, than to try and start over from scratch and have trouble doing so. With that, Ban resealed the bag away, and then everyone began their tasks. Later, Ban was on his break and was walking around the village. As he was walking, he couldn't help but notice how run down the village was. As he was passing a house, he noticed a little girl with dirty blonde hair, and murmured, Elaine. Then the girl turned around and Ban shook his head before saying to himself, that's impossible. Back with the others, they grew curious about a certain grisly sin, and Elizabeth decided to ask, by the way, Sir Meliodas, what kind of person is Sir King? Meliodas then stopped what he was doing and thought about it for a second, before answering, well, in a nutshell, I guess King is kinda like the mascot or pet of the 7 deadly sins. Hawk then said, you gotta be kidding me. What kind of food service establishment would keep an animal inside? At this, everyone stopped and just stared at Hawk, with Hawk staring back. This went on for a good minute, before Meliodas said, actually Hawk, it's not that kind of pet. Then what kind? Hawk asked. Meliodas then remembered something about Ban. Oh! Come to think of it, there was a time when Ban was going through some kinda weird phase, and just began collecting a bunch of stuffed animals. Hearing this, everyone began to laugh at that, imagining Ban with tons of stuffed animals around him. That's really cute, Elizabeth said while still laughing. Meliodas nodded his head and said, after that, King just began crying about the whole thing, and once Ban fell asleep, King spent an entire night fixing then returning each and every single stuffed animal back to their owner. He seems a little different, but it sounds like Sir King has a really kind heart, Elizabeth said. Then Hawk said, on the other hand, Ban sounded like a real good-for-nothing. I bet those two didn't get along, huh? At this, everyone looked at Hawk, before Meliodas said, actually, Ban only acted like that if he was extremely drunk, which didn't happen often. However, you're partially right. The two of them didn't get along very well, and it seemed like Ban only ever did something to upset King because King was mad at Ban even when they first met. He also seemed to really not like Ban being around Diane, so because of this, he would follow Ban around everywhere he went. But it was because of this that when Ban caused a mess sometimes due to how he was, King was there to help clean them up. You could say they were the unlikely duo. Back with Ban, he was currently holding the little girl gently in his arms. Hey, little girl. As he was saying this, he was lightly patting her cheek to wake her up. Finally she began to stir and he asked, "Are you awake now?" The girl was waking up when the two heard, "Wah! What are you doing?" Hearing this, Ben turned to see a boy who appeared to be older than the girl, with curly dirty blonde hair. He was wearing a shirt, brown shoes, and overalls and was currently holding a pitchfork. The boy then shouted, "Take your hands off of Ellen. Are you even planning on taking my sister from me? Huh? She just passed out in front of me. That's all," Ben said with a calm face. The boy, however, wasn't listening and shouted, "Why? What did we ever do to you?" Ben replied calmly, "Hey, if you're her brother, are you making sure she's getting enough to eat?" The boy, however, still wouldn't listen and shouted, "Shut up. Everything is your guy's fault. Take your hands off my sister and get out of here." Ben, getting annoyed, said, "I'm asking if you're making sure she's eating enough. If you aren't going to listen to what other people say, I'll take her." The boy was getting angry and beginning to tear up. The sister was weakly trying to tell her brother everything was fine, but he wouldn't listen and began charging at Ben, until he stabbed him with his pitchfork. Seeing this, the sister ran up and exclaimed, "Brother! This person looked after me," surprising the brother. Meanwhile, Ben calmly pulled out the pitchfork, and the wound healed, while the boy went on to explain how a group of holy knights came and took everything and everyone with them. He went on to explain how the two of them were hiding under the floor but eventually ran out of food. "I'm really sorry." The boy apologized. "I did something like this to someone who helped my sister. How can I erase my sins?" Ben then said, "Erase your sin? You're just a brat. What are you talking about?" The boy raised his head and began exclaiming, "But I dash." When he looked and saw the stab wound was gone, surprising the two kids. "Let me give you some advice, kids," Ben said, getting the kids' attention. "A real sin can't be erased no matter what you do." The kids were looking at each other, when suddenly Ben was stabbed by a spear, and laying on the spear was King. King then said, "Glad you finally realized that." Ben then coughed up blood and the two kids were getting scared, and were holding each other. "Hey Ben, how goes?" asked King. "Awesome, it's so great to see you after all these years." "What's wrong? It's not like you to be so quiet." Ben, however, didn't recognize King and asked, "Who the hell are you?" "Ah, Ben. My feelings are hurt." "You really don't remember me?" King asked. "I don't remember you at all," Ben replied. "Sorry about that, bud." King then said, "Oh well, it doesn't really matter. What isn't important?" At this moment, Ben could feel the spear beginning to rotate at high speed, before it shot straight through his torso. King then finished, "Is that your ban, the fox sin of greed?" The spear then began to spin around a bit, before it stopped horizontally, and King stood on the blade, and asked, "Or maybe you would prefer I call you this name?" The kids then watched as the hole in Ban's chest began to close and heal up quickly, while Ban wiped the blood on his chin away. King then said, "Ben the undead?" Ben then looked at King and said, "You're getting really annoying, kid. Talking about me as if you know me. What the hell do you even know about me anyway?" King then sighed and said, "I know your sin." Confusing Ban, then King continued, "Even if you don't remember me, you can at least remember your own sin, can't you? You know, that terrible awful crime you committed? To satisfy your selfish greed for eternal life, you murdered the holy woman of the Fountain of Youth." At this, Ben then had a quick flashback and got frustrated despite not showing it. He then began to move his hand, cracking it, before clenching it, and said, "Hey kids, you better get out here. Head to the shop nearby." The boy then grabbed his sister's hand and the two began running. King then shifted and sat on the pole of his spear, before shooting straight at Ben and asked, "I'm right, aren't I?" Ben quickly dodged at the last second, surprising King, before clenching his fist and saying, "I'm not gonna ask you again. Who the hell are you?" He then threw his fist, nearly catching King, had King not shot forward on his spear, destroying the wall, causing Ben to miss. Ben then landed on his feet, and looked for King but didn't see him anywhere. King then appeared in the air behind Ban and said, "I'm glad you made it here to play with me. Because you walked right into my trap." King then made a movement with his hand, and launched his spear at Ban at high speed, but it was dodged. King then said while moving his hand more, "Now you won't escape. Maybe you can remember Bumblebee." Then the spear kept launching itself at Ban rapidly, but Ban kept dodging. Ban then jumped at King and tried to land a kick, while saying, "Sorry, it's not ringing a bell either." But King phased out of existence before reappearing on the ground. I wish she could see this, and watch the man who took her life, pathetically begging mercy in agony. King said, as he began to float up. Ben, having been annoyed enough, cracked his hand, and said, "Now for the last time." Then he got a wide smirk on his face while his normally lazy eyes got a wild glint in them, before he raised his hand towards King, surprising King at what he felt. "Who the hell are you?" However, before they could continue, Meliodas came out of nowhere with a cup and bopped Ban on the head, while saying, "Bad Ban." This got Ban to calm down, and turn while rubbing his head where he got tapped, and said, "Hey, Captain. What you doing out here?" Meliodas then said, "Getting you. Your break ended a while ago, and we came out here searching for you, then we met those 2 kids you sent our way. What are you doing anyways?" Ben then jabbed his thumb in King's direction before saying, "The flying midget there decided to pick a fight with me. I mean, look at this." Ben then gestured to his now ruined jacket. "He completely destroyed my threads." Meliodas then looked up at King with curiosity, when Diane walked into the clearing with Naruto and Hinata on her shoulders, asking, "What's going on over here?" The 3 women then saw King floating there, and while Naruto and Hinata were confused on who this was, Diane focused on him for a second, before both her and Meliodas exclaimed, "King!" This surprised both Naruto and Hinata, but Ben just looked confused for a second. Then what they said finally sunk in, and he got a shocked look on his face, before yelling at Meliodas while pointing at King, "How the hell is that King?" "No matter how you look at it, that's King," said Meliodas, before continuing, "Maybe he lost a little weight." "A little? That ain't even the main issue here," Ben exclaimed. Diane then looked at King with a happy smile and said, "King, we're so glad to have found you. I'm happy to see you again, King." King didn't answer, and simply turned his head before taking off. Later, back at the boar hat, everyone was inside and Ban had just finished cooking some food for the 2 kids and said, "Here you go. Eat up." The 2 kids and Hawk were staring at the food, with Hawk salivating heavily but was pulled back by Meliodas. The kids, however, were skeptical and asked, "Are you sure? If you're not gonna eat it, I'll feed it to the pig," Ben said, getting Hawk to salivate more and begin nodding his head rapidly with excitement. At least, until the kids began eating, getting Hawk to fall in the puddle of saliva he made with great despair. However, he lifted his head, when a plate was set on the floor for him by Ban, getting Hawk to salivate again and begin quickly eating. The boy asked, "Are you sure this is okay?" "We don't have any money." "It's fine that you don't have any money, but in exchange," Ban said, getting their attention, "tell me where the capital of the dead is." This confused everyone, and Naruto asked, Onii-chan, didn't we already find King?" Meliodas then said, "She's right, you know? And since we found him, there's no need to go there anymore." "There's no way that was King," Ban said. Meliodas then said, "He was real, he was fake." The 2 then got into a childish game of repeating real and fake over and over until the boy spoke up and asked, "You guys want to go to the capital of the dead too?" This got the 2 of them to stop and turn towards the boy too. The boy nodded and said that kid asked a few times too. He wants to go to the capital of the dead, no matter what. This shocked everyone, and then Diane asked, "King's also trying to get into the capital of the dead?" The boy nodded and continued, "For the past few days, he's been coming here to figure out how to get to the capital of the dead." Karina then asked, "If he's been looking how to get there for the past few days, does that mean the capital is a grave in a really remote place?" The boy shook his head and said, "No. It's right around here." This confused everyone and Tenen asked, "What do you mean?" The boy then said, "The entrance to the capital of the dead is in this village. But you can't get there just because you want to." Everyone was confused on what the boy meant, with Ban even stating that he has no interest in riddles, before Meliodas then rigged a plate of food tied to a stick onto Hawk's back, keeping it away from him. The boy then said, "The capital of the dead isn't a grave, it's a place where the people who've passed on live." At this, Meliodas said, "So basically, it's the afterlife." Everyone was wondering how you would even reach a place like that. Then Ban asked, "Have you ever been there?" With the boy vehemently saying, "No," and that it was all just superstition. However, it's because of this rumor that the village got started, since travelers and rich people would come here, before giving up and just settling down here. The boy informed. Sinet then said, however, there's no possible way to get there. Gaining everyone's attention, she continued, it's the afterlife, meaning you would have to die, and there is no coming back from the dead. The little girl then said, a priceless memory shared with the deceased will open the path to the capital. Our next-door neighbor was always saying that. Everyone looked at her in curiosity, while Ban's eyes grew shadowed, with only Kushina taking note of this. The little girl apologized for not knowing any more, but then Ban began rubbing her head and said, thank you. Your information was more than enough to cover the food. After some discussion, it was decided that Kurenai would stay and watch the kids, and with that, everyone began to head back to the village, with Kushina keeping an eye on Ban. As they were walking, Hawk asked, hey, why does King want to go to the capital of the dead in the first place? Meliodas then answered, well, I'm sure we'll find out when we get there. Diane then asked, but why would King run away? Meanwhile, on the cliff above everyone, a familiar black hound was watching everyone, before retreating into the bushes. It then began barking at King, who was currently clutching his green pillow while shouting, I'm so stupid! 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 I made it look like I ran away because I saw Diane. Ugh, I couldn't help it though. Especially if she said something like that with a smile like that. King then remembers Diane smiling at him while saying, I'm so happy to see you again, King. King then began to fly in circles while having a mental breakdown on how cute Diane was while also freaking out at the possibility that she figured out he likes her. He then grabbed the hound by its mouth and shouted, what should I do? King then began remembering how Meliodas hasn't changed one bit, despite it being 10 years, and was wondering how that was even possible. King then began gripping his pillow roughly and said, you too, don't be fooled by Ban. That scoundrel. He then increased his grip on the pillow, Ban. I will never forgive you. However, before King could think any more about that, his attention was caught when the hound began barking, and King asked while floating over, what is it, Oslo? The two then looked down to see the entire group was standing in a spot. While King was blushing at seeing Diane, but was greatly surprised to see how small she looked right now, when a few minutes ago, she was huge. King was confused on what was going on, but then he grew curious on who the other women were, since he had never met them before. Meanwhile with the group, Diane said, looks like the entrance is somewhere around here. Elizabeth then asked, but isn't that just superstition? Kushina then said, well, not all superstition is just that, superstition. Sometimes, there are truths to stories, but they get twisted over time, until they eventually become stories. Everyone nodded their heads, and then Hawk asked, but even if the capital exists, how are we supposed to get there? Meliodas then joked and suggested, what if we kill ourselves? Everyone but Ban then shouted, are you stupid? Naruto then said, a priceless memory with the deceased will open the path. Anyone got any memories of someone who died? Elizabeth then said how she wants to meet her mother, since she never got to know her when she was little. But then Hawk reminded her that she didn't have any memories with her mother. As everyone was shooting around ideas, Ban stood a little away from the group with shadowed eyes, and thought, Elaine. A few seconds later, Hannah felt something and looked down, before exclaiming, look! Gaining everyone's attention, including the hidden kings, to see that there were flowers all over the ground in full bloom, surprising everyone. As everyone kept looking at the flowers, Kushina looked at Ban and thought, just what are you hiding? After a couple seconds, the flower petals began to get blown by the wind, surrounding everyone in a swirl of petals. When King saw this, he immediately took off and entered the storm of petals. Everyone covered their faces, except for Ban, who just stood there waiting. After a minute, the petals and wind died down, getting everyone to put their arms down and open their eyes. What they all saw took their breath away. When they opened their eyes, they found themselves standing on a giant, green crystal. When they looked around, they saw the green ground covered in large protruding crystals with the sky looking to be green with lime-green clouds. Everyone looked around before Diane asked, Captain? Meliodas nodded his head and replied, yeah. Meanwhile, a hidden king was thinking, there's no doubt. This is the capital of the dead. What does this mean? I've tried so many times, but I could never get here. King then looked at everyone and thought, the memory of someone among them opened the path to here? Everyone was wondering how they managed to get here. Elizabeth thought it was her desire to see her mother, But then Naruto reminded her that it couldn't be, since Elizabeth didn't have any memories of her mother. Hawk thought it was his leftovers, but that was immediately shot down. Everyone was wondering what could have brought them here, and as they were talking, Kushina was looking at Ban, who was currently just looking around. Suddenly, Ban sensed something and quickly turned his head in the direction, to see what looked like a girl with short, blonde hair wearing a white dress. Kushina saw Ban tense and asked, "Ban?" Getting everyone to turn their attention towards Ban, before he bolted forward at great speed, while still looking in the direction. This action shocked everyone, while Diane and Naruto shouted, "Ban/Onai-chan." Everyone watched as he quickly disappeared from view, before something passed them, as they heard someone shout, "Stop!" The group looked to see King was the one who shot past them. This surprised the group, with Meliodas and Diane exclaiming, "King!" Elizabeth then said, "That's Sir King? He looks nothing like the wanted poster." Sasuke then asked, "What did he mean by stop?" "He looked like he really wanted to catch Ban." Enko asked, "Are those two fighting?" Diane responded and said the two of them have always had a bad relationship, but King looked like he really wanted to catch Ban. She then turned to Meliodas and asked, "Captain, what should we do?" Meliodas then said, "I guess we'll chase after them for now." Meanwhile, Ban was currently running and jumping off of several crystals with King flying right behind him and slowly catching up. King shouted, "I won't let you get away." But Ban ignored him and just kept running, while thinking, "Is it really you, Elaine?" Back in the real world, the kids were staring in shock at where everyone were just standing. The kids were shocked by the fact the people they just met suddenly disappeared in a swarm of flower petals. While they stared in shock, Kurinai was staring calmly and was thinking, "Be safe, everyone." As they kept staring at the spot, they missed the person coming up behind them. Suddenly, they heard someone behind them say, "I see. It looks like the capital of the dead actually exists." The three of them quickly turned around to see a girl approaching them. She had a slim build and long black hair with narrowed eyes that appeared to be closed. She was wearing a white and pink one-piece with a white coat. She had knee-high, heel boots, white gloves that reached the center of her upper arms with pink designs, and a pale pink headband. The only armor she was wearing were a pair of knee protectors and gloves while she had a rapier at her hip. "Who is this person, brother?" Ellen asked. "I don't know, Ellen," the boy said. Kurinai asked, while moving the kids behind her, "Who are you, and what is it that you want here?" "My name is Gela, and if it's alright with you, please tell me how to get to the capital of the dead," the now named Gela said. The boy then asked, "Why should we tell you anything? Because if not, then I am afraid I will have to force a response out of you." Gela responded. Kurinai didn't like this response and said, "Kids, I need you to go and hide, alright?" The kids didn't want to leave the nice lady alone, but when they saw the look she gave them, they nodded. The brother then grabbed his sister's hand and led them away from Kurinai and Gela, but still kept an eye on the two. Meanwhile, Gela was still staring at Kurinai, with Kurinai doing the same back at Gela. Kurinai then said, "Now that the children are gone, can you tell me why it is that you seek the capital of the dead?" "I am here to serve justice to the 7 deadly sins," Gela said. "Well, you're not getting past me," Kurinai exclaimed. "I was hoping you'd say that," Gela said, putting Kurinai on edge. Gela then unsheathed her rapier quickly, causing a massive burst of magic to come from Gela, sending Kurinai back several feet while covering her face. It then calmed down enough that Kurinai was able to stop moving and uncover her face to see Gela standing with her rapier ready. Gela then said, "I hope you've prepared yourself, otherwise this will be a short fight." Before Kurinai even knew what happened, an explosion happened and sent her flying into the cliffside. Hard. This caused Kurinai to cough up blood before she fell to the ground. She weakly looked up and found Gela standing there looking at her, with her rapier pointed at her, with smoke coming from the tip. Then a small orb of fire was created on the tip and Gela said, "Now, are you going to tell me what I want or do I need to kill you?" Kurinai then looked at Gela with a glare and said, "I would rather die than tell you anything." Gela then said, "So be it then," and with that, Gela prepared to launch her attack at Kurinai. However, before she could, she was interrupted by a shout of, "Stop!" Gela stopped and turned around to see the boy standing there, shaking, sweating and looking absolutely terrified. Kurinai weakly looked over and exclaimed, "What are you doing? Get out of here!" The boy then exclaimed, "Please don't hurt her anymore." Gela then dissipated her attack and said, "Well, can you tell me how to get to the capital of the dead?" The boy then said, A priceless memory shared with the deceased will open the path to the capital of the dead. Guila tilted her head. I'm afraid I don't understand. We don't get it either. Who'd know anything about where dead people are headed? The boy responded, then asked, Now please stop hurting the nice lady. I see. Guila said, sheathing her rapier, Thank you. They all then watched as she raised her hand in the position to strike. Meanwhile, back in the capital of the dead, the group were currently walking along the big crystal they were standing on, while calling out for Ban. The group had mixed emotions about what was going on. Diane, Naruto, and a couple others felt confusion and worry, while Meliodas and Kushina were only curious as to what was going on with Ban. After a couple minutes of calling, Diane complained, Geez, where did those two go? While puffing her cheeks and crossing her arms. My question is, why there isn't a single ghost or anything in this so-called capital of the dead? Hawk asked, Right, Elizabeth? If there were any I'd be scared, Elizabeth said. Then she asked, though, why was Sir King chasing after Sir Ban? Kushina then said, That's a good question, but I don't think it's the right one. Gaining everyone's attention, she then said, The better question should be, what was Ban chasing after? This got everyone to freeze and look at each other, before they all continued on. Meanwhile, over with Ban and King, Ban was still running, completely unaware of King following him. King then said to himself, Don't think you can get away from me, Ban. King then flew himself faster and right in front of Ban, getting Ban to stop and exclaim, You again, fake King. King was confused and said, Fake King? I'm the real King. Ben then said, Yeah, whatever. Look, get lost, fake. I'm busy right now. While making a shoe motion with his hand, King then said, Don't wanna? Ben just ignored this and said, Whatever. Before he took off past King again, King just continued to fly next to Ban while listing off a bunch of things Ban did in the past. From the time Ben just collected any and all stuffed animals to when Ben got drunk and endangered the other sins during a battle at Edinburgh. After King said this, Ben reached out and tried to grab King, but King would just dodge. This continued for about a minute, until Ben eventually stopped and said, So it is you, King, isn't that what I've been saying? King asked. In that case, Ben began, before launching his arm in a backhanded swing towards King and exclaimed, I won't feel bad about clobbering you. But was surprised when he turned and found he instead hit King's pillow. King then floated down and said, You always did pull pranks on me and tried to hurt me. Just like back in the old days. If you don't remember, you had an issue with me ever since we first met. You always seemed to have a dislike for me, especially when I would hang out with Diane. Ben said, getting King to look frustrated. Ben then asked, And now you seem to have a deep hatred for me. Why is that? King looked frustrated for a little bit, before he calmed down and said, That is none of your concern. Besides, I wouldn't want to reunite with you like this. King then told Ban how, after they were branded as traitors, he had returned to the Fairy King's forest, only to find everything was burned and destroyed. He said how he discovered it was all due to a bandit who was after the secret treasure, the Fountain of Youth, and had killed the guardian saint of the fountain. Ban looked at King with his normal lazy eyes and asked, Where did you hear that? However, since he was focused on King, he completely missed how the pillow was changing shape and growing, until it resembled a large bear-shaped pillow. He noticed the pillow too late, and was grabbed and restrained by the pillow. As Ban was struggling against the pillow bear holding him captive, King said, The way you are now, you're no match for me. King then began floating over, while Ban asked, King, how do you know about that woman? King, once he was close enough, grabbed Ban by his jacket and said, The saint you killed, Elaine, was my sister. Ban heard this, and just slightly narrowed his eyes at King, while they lost their laziness and became focused. King, seeing this, was frustrated that Ban didn't have much of a reaction, but then he calmed down and let go of Ban's jacket. King then began to float away from Ban and began to say, I didn't think much of it back when I was around you. Why a human like you had immortality? I had no idea that it was a power that you got from killing my sister and stealing water from the fountain. Ben then said, I see, so you were her brother. And you want revenge by killing me, but there are two issues with that. And the glaring one, Ben then got a wide smirk and shouted, I asked that I'm immortal. King then turned back to Ban and asked, Did you know that my sacred treasure has several forms? King then extended his arm, and began to twist his hand. Well, you would know that if you had ever showed interest in it. King then exclaimed, Spirit Spear, Chastiful. Third configuration, Fossilization. With that, the bear began to shift into a twin-headed spear, where the head was shaped like crab claws and was yellow. It then shot forward and stabbed Ban through the chest, where the flesh began to turn to stone, surprising Ban. King then said, "I've been looking forward to this moment. Are you watching the lane?" Meanwhile, off to the side, appeared to be the same girl that Ban was chasing. She had shoulder-length blonde hair, green eyes, and a flowing white dress. The girl then thought, "Ban? Is it really you?" So this part ends here. Alright, that's it for today's video, guys. Let me know in the comment section how was the story, and also don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I will meet you in another video. Bye bye.